Chapter 1260. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little heavy, Gavin Rad came to smooth things over. Yo boss, you make it sound like we always have a way out when dealing with the enemy leader. Those who don't have the guts wouldn't have dared to come a long time ago. We've killed a few demigods after all. Fine. You're awesome. Gavin Rad gave them a good beating and the atmosphere in the team suddenly became much better. After clearing the mini-bosses on the two high platforms near Thaddeus, everyone cast their own spells and jumped from the high platforms to the platform where Thaddeus was. Of course, a certain dwarf king in the form of a winter melon had short legs and needed Duque to lift him up with hand of magic. He was still croaking and waving his hands in midair. Help, please don't abandon me. I've done meritorious deeds for the Alliance. I've bled, you can't just throw me into the pool below. It's dirty and smelly. The grave of the great Magni Bronzebeard shouldn't be here. Duque, everyone, it had to be said that the Bronzebeard dwarves who had always said that only rocks and iron or would never betray them, would become neurotic once their feet left the ground. Sigh, you should learn how to ride griffins from your wild hammer cousins, Duque complained. Bullsh *T. Why don't you ask Kudrin to learn Avatar from me? Magni cursed. Duque couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing that the team was almost in place, he directly threw Magni over. A dwarf that looked like a tin can suddenly crashed into Thaddeus the Frankenstein monster like a cannonball. The giant, who had been silent a moment ago, had his hard outer skin crack and fall off like cracked plasterboard. Having just woken up from a deep sleep, Thaddeus' voice made people feel that this giant was still in chaos. The next moment, the two huge spiral electric towers on the high platform were activated, and a huge amount of electricity was instantly injected into the body of this stitched giant. Even the naked eye could see the dazzling electric arcs enter the giant's body. Please. Stop. Stop this thing. Help me, save me. No. No. Thaddeus' cry for help made several Alliance powerhouses hesitate. Obviously, Thaddeus was a tragedy. Everyone could not help but recall the Doomsday Army experiment diary that Duque had shown them from the fortress's system before the war. It was a nightmarish record. After suffering a disastrous defeat at Mount Hygel, Mount Hercules was not the only one in the world. The Doomsday Army looked through the video of the battle. Arthas, who was still a Death Knight at that time, coldly said, "Without the support of magic, my army of stitches will never be able to unify this world." She was clearly on the verge of death, but under the effect of a primitive druid's magic, the bear turned into a giant bear and slapped down the broken stitched monster. Today, these words were carved by Kel Thuzad's magic on the door of Naxxrama's laboratory. Countless scourge scientists worked hard for their master's arrogant plan to conquer the world. No matter how much you strengthened a stitched monster made of corpses, it would only be in terms of strength and sturdiness. If you wanted to use magic, you couldn't use corpses that already had no magic power. Since corpses can't maintain magic power, I'll just use living people as experiments. Master's will cannot be violated. We must speed up. Master is about to arrive in this world. We must give the new stitched monster to Master as a gift. Under Cal Thuzad's instructions, the minions of the Scourge were sent out to search for suitable test subjects. Ogre mages, orc warlocks, human paladins, Tauren shamans, etc. However, the experiment was not successful. Arcane magic, shadow curses, and holy power disappeared without a trace once they came into contact with the plague. However, the power of the elements merged well with the plague virus. It was just that the test subjects did not mutate. They only had magic power but did not have strong bodies. The new plague can't make the Tauren race mutate? Then let's use the perfect human structure and find a way to extract the power of the elements and fuse it with arcane magic. Under Cal Thuzad's guidance, there was a new improvement in the experiment. A human test subject named Thaddeus had the ability to attack with elemental lightning under the effects of the plague and arcane magic. However, after just one magic release, the stitched monster stopped moving. Can our technology only go so far? Although very disappointed, Cal Thuzad could only accept reality. Then build him a room and let him be the guard of my fortress to defend the dignity of the Lich King. The former paladin Thaddeus was now imprisoned in the dirty and dark Naxxramas, enduring both psychological and physical pain. His painful voice echoed in Naxxramas and lingered for a long time. "Help me. Save me." When the words in the video that lingered in the hearts of the strong once again echoed in their ears, Kalia finally couldn't take it anymore. "Duque, Duque knew what the kind-hearted Kalia wanted to say, but he still shook his head. Not every soul poisoned by the scourge can be saved. Queen Sylvie shouted, "You're not planning to turn Kel Thizad into your elemental emissary, are you?" "Of course not." "That's good. How could Duque offend everyone and do such a thing?" At this time the cracks on Thaddeus' skin had already been completed. What appeared in front of everyone was an absolute construct giant. Thaddeus' eyes were red as he said in a voice full of guilt, "You're too late. Can only obey." Duque's gaze passed through Thaddeus' heavy body and saw that incomplete and dirty soul. He finally sighed. "Do it." The flames of the divine weapon Balrog's hammer lit up first. With one hit from the hammer, Thaddeus' leg was charred black and deeply caved in. If it was a living creature, even if it was a dragon man, they probably wouldn't be able to stand up after receiving such damage. Unfortunately, Thaddeus was a stitched creature. His bones were made from the remains of giant dragons, and his muscles came from the fresh flesh and blood of many giants. Magni's fierce attack had only damaged the first layer of his flesh. The problem was that there was still a second layer, a third layer. Who knew which layer it was? Pfft. Magni spat fiercely. Gavin Rad's wind sword also slashed forward, but this time the effect of the wind sword wasn't very good. Because Thaddeus also used the power of lightning. Gavin Rad instinctively felt that his wind sword was simply helping to charge this thing. He could only immediately put away the wind sword and replace it with an epic-grade hammer that was more effective against constructs. Chapter 1261. Psych. Anyone who had ever played with magnets knew that like repelled and opposites attracted. It would be so easy if they could do the same with Thaddeus. The problem was that they couldn't. When Duque led a party in the game, he could scold the fools who ran to the positive pole with negative charges. After all, it was absolutely common for a party to be wiped out and they would get used to it. In addition, being wiped out was a bit like the accumulation of pleasure from practicing the sword. After spending time, effort, intelligence and sweat, once the boss was successfully defeated, that kind of accumulated pleasure would burst out in one go, almost burning one's brain. It was really hard to describe with words. Ahem. However, striving to succeed in one go like this also had a different kind of thrill, like walking on a tightrope. At first, Duque didn't feel anything, but he was immediately greeted with his first shock. Suddenly all the powerhouses felt the change in the air. Some felt their hair stand on end, while others even had their hair stand on end. Well, Theon's mother had suddenly turned into an afro. Duque immediately realized what was going on. Obviously the electric charge had fallen. But this was the real world of Azeroth, not a game. So even if the powerhouses could sense the charge, it didn't matter if their knowledge of physics was zero. People couldn't judge positive and negative charges with the naked eye. Duque was startled and immediately had the system genie get to work. Immediately analyze the positive and negative charges and mark everyone's head with a phantom symbol. Use a red plus sign for positive poles and a blue minus sign for negative poles. Duque's order immediately gave the powerhouses a clear direction. Even though the situation was chaotic, the guy with the negative pole symbol on his head still ran around Thaddeus, who was attacking Magni, and ran to the area designated by Duque. All sorts of things happened. Beneticus seemed a little confused. He was clearly a positive pole, but he actually ran out too. Queen Sylvanas was quick to react and grabbed him. Then in her panic, the negative Kalia actually stepped on her own mage robes and fell down. Moreover, she fell less than 5 meters away from the positive faction. Time seemed to have frozen. Even Kalia's beautiful face was frozen with fear. At the critical moment, Duque made his move. A mutated Bigby's Vajrapum was pushed out, and Kalia felt her entire body fly out as light as a feather. It felt as if she was riding on a cloud. Then in less than a second she had already landed gently in the crowd of negative poles. Phew! More than one person let out a long sigh of relief. This was also a reality. In the game, there wasn't a single pharaoh who could use mathematical sorcery to save his teammates. It didn't matter how many there were. If the idiot acted foolishly, the whole team would be buried with him. 5 seconds seemed like a long time, but in reality 2 blinks of an eye had passed. Fortunately, all 15 of them were in position. Everyone was surprised to find that under the amplification effect of the same polarity electric charge, their attack power and healing ability had actually increased by several times. Hey, this feels great. This time, when Magni swung his hammer down in a circle, he realized that Thaddeus' stick-like finger had been knocked away. As a warrior, he had always taken on the most difficult task of tanking the boss. When would he be able to bully the boss like this? Mag was feeling really good. Come on. Eat my hammer and continue to hurt each other. The Balrog's hammer brought up clouds of fire. The visual impact of the intense light and shadow made people forget that this fellow was actually a defensive warrior who was tanking the boss. There was also Gavin Rad like him. Unfortunately, the wind sword was silent, so he couldn't be. Of course, most heroes fought in silence in their own way. Against abominations or constructed enemies, the ranger's attack power was usually greatly reduced. This was because these large undead creatures didn't have any so-called weak points. The power of arrows couldn't compare to close-range weapons of the same level. However, the Windrunner sisters used their unparalleled archery to create a disassembly-style tactic. Since even the abomination's eyes and throat were just decorations, they simply didn't care about anything else and focused on shooting the abomination's stitches. In the midst of Thaddeus' fierce attacks and dazzling lightning, to shoot a small stitches didn't just require the ability to shoot hundreds of steps away, it also required astonishing accuracy. Otherwise, an arrow that went astray could very well become Thaddeus' protection. The Windrunner sisters did it. They were like a butcher dismembering an ox, constantly disassembling Thaddeus' entire body. While the close-range warriors were still busy shooting off who knew how many layers of this Frankenstein's leg, they were shocked to find that the flesh on Thaddeus' upper body was falling off. When they looked up, they could see that he had already lost 3 sizes of his body. This was possible. The 3 sisters clearly didn't even have a divine weapon, but their damage output was the highest in the entire team. With just the 3 of them, they had shaved this big guy into a roly-poly doll. They drew their bows, knocked their arrows, and took small quick steps with their elegant and slender legs. Even if they needed to change their polarity, they still maintained their attacks while the other heroes were busy running around. The 3 sisters used the most elegant fighting stances to illustrate the art and aesthetics of battle. The beauties were like a painting and the arrows were like a rainbow. Even the most picky heroes couldn't help but reveal a look of admiration in their eyes. It was already an honor for a man to have one of such valiant heroines, not to mention that Duque had all 3 sisters. Gavin Rad was excited. Boss, I heard that the Windrunner family's Lilith is still unclaimed? As soon as he said that, the 3 sisters turned their eyes at the same time and glared at him with murderous eyes. They were clearly saying, "You Gavin Rad aren't qualified." As the boss, Duque was also helpless. The palm of his hand was flesh and so was the back of his hand. He couldn't open a harem for himself and not open one for his lackeys, right? What's more, Gavin Rad had his eyes on Lilith, who was originally a cute and tragic boy in history. If you can't even get past your sister-in-law, who's to blame? Since he had no hope, Duque could only send him on his way. Just in time for the polarity change. Gavin Rad, as a positive polarity, stood out in the middle of a group of negative polarities. He was already prepared to run, but Duque didn't say anything and just kicked him with an arcane Hong Kong kick. Gavin Rad, who hadn't made any mistakes in his previous runs, was caught off guard and sent flying into the group of positive polarities. "Boss, what are you doing?" Duque stuttered and replied slowly, "I suddenly realized that you're lacking in IQ. I was afraid that you wouldn't know how to run, so I sent you on your way." At this moment, Gavin Rad completely gave up. Chapter 1262. Kill. I'll crush your bones. I'll smash you. Let's taste the pain together. Thaddeus' roars continued throughout the entire battle. If one listened to the sound and didn't look at the situation, perhaps outsiders would think that Thaddeus had the upper hand. Only by seeing it with their own eyes would they know that this once incomparably burly giant-like Frankenstein with a muscular appearance was now almost a skeleton king. The powerful abomination suture thread was made from the most powerful and sturdy shadow force threads, difficult for normal blades to cut through to begin with. However, before the 3 Windstalker sisters' sharp arrows, all of the suture threads were cut with a noise. Without the support of the sutures, Thaddeus' huge body, which was more than 10 meters tall, was disintegrating piece by piece. Theon's Ashbringer didn't have a good effect on Thaddeus' body, but when it slashed at the falling pieces of flesh, the golden light of Ashbringer easily destroyed the pieces of flesh and turned them into ashes. It was precisely because of this situation that everyone felt a sense of confusion and sorrow as they listened to Thaddeus' furious roars that they couldn't figure out what was going on. Thaddeus, who had lost his muscles, also lost his powerful strength. If he could have flattened a steam tank with one slap at the beginning, now he could only make a dent at most. His power storage also plummeted, and the chain lightning that was blasted out with the high magic resistance of the experts could only hurt them a little, not cause any damage. Benedicta's and Kalia could be healed with Restore. Theon didn't stop and suddenly said, Thaddeus, I remember he was from the second batch of paladins. Gavin Rad put away his cynicism. Yes, Uther personally brought him. Theon sighed. I feel uncomfortable thinking that the more powerful the paladin, the more powerful they will be after becoming a Death Knight. At least the commander didn't fall. The commander that Gavin Rad mentioned was naturally Uther, the former commander of the Silver Hand. The fall of every paladin was the death of the Holy Light doctrine. Why was it that the more devout the clergy, the more terrifying they would be after they fell? This was already a sorrow that no one in the Church of Holy Light could answer. They believed in light and eventually embraced darkness, becoming an even more terrifying opposite. From Arthas to the other 3-4 horsemen of the apocalypse to Thaddeus. An ominous cloud shrouded the Holy Knights. None understood why, but if life was to continue flourishing in this world, the clergies were fated to carry their doubts and keep moving forward. Beside him, Duque also sighed. Let's end this. That's right. It was time to end this. Suddenly, Tyrion Fordring took advantage of the moment when Gavinrad's sanction hit Thaddeus in the head and knocked him out, whose resistance had been greatly reduced. Tyrion Fordring performed a dragonfly's triple sweep of the water. He ignored the heavy armor on his body, which weighed more than 100 kilograms, and actually used the pelvic bone that Thaddeus spat out after cutting off his body as leverage. He stepped on the giant's back 3 times in a row and flew to the back of Thaddeus' neck like a cloud. This was the first time Ashbringer had used his full strength in this battle. The dazzling golden light used the height of 8 meters as a dividing line, dividing the entire area into 2 levels. The lower level was filled with scattered lightning, while the upper level was only left with the purest holy golden light. The broad blade of the sword slashed fiercely at Thaddeus's spine, and everyone could hear the crisp cracking sound. However, this strike was still unable to behead Thaddeus. Go! Duque directly used Bigby's Vajra fist to hit the sole of Magni's foot. Magni, who was in his normal state, directly activated Deity's descent in midair. It looked like he directly rose into the air with his huge body and flew to a place level with Thaddeus' head. Lose your head dash. In terms of proportion, the thick and short arms swelled to the extreme. The Balrog hammer, which was already 10 times larger than usual, once again condensed from flames into substance, turning into a huge red-black warhammer full of spikes, and smashed viciously into Thaddeus' iron chin. The already cracked cervical vertebra finally couldn't withstand this ultimate level of attack. The huge head turned more than 360 degrees and finally flew into the air. The final boss of the construction zone, Thaddeus, killed. The experts were supposed to be happy about this. However, when Thaddeus' head fell to the ground and he said his last words, everyone was silent. That was because that was the last words of a holy knight who had regained his sanity as a monster-like existence. Thank you. His heart was suddenly blocked by something and it felt heavy and stuffy. His ears seemed to be covered by a layer of membrane and everything was hazy. His nose felt like it was blocked and he couldn't breathe. If Thaddeus was a bastard like Baron Rivendare who took the initiative to fall, then even a kind holy knight would be happy to see his end. Unfortunately, he wasn't. In fact, everyone knew from the start that this was likely to be the case. Everyone tried to use a more relaxed atmosphere to get through this difficult battle. However, in the end they couldn't help but feel dejected. They could feel that Thaddeus' soul was starting to dissipate. Perhaps this was a form of release for him. However, for the living this was like a new heavy shackle. In order to continue forward, they had no choice but to bring even heavier shackles with them on the journey. Gavin Rad suddenly sighed. I suddenly understand why Arthas fell back then. Yes, that's right. He was originally a holy knight with a kind heart. His pure holy light and perfect aptitude as a holy knight said it all. And then, the scourge used their schemes to tie shackles and shackles on his heart, making his footsteps heavier and his soul more and more tormented. When the young prince's soul broke through its limits, when obsession replaced the belief of justice and became the master of the soul, then the final fall would inevitably come. Everyone was sighing. Everyone was sighing. Kalia quietly walked to Duque's side and pulled on Duque's sleeve, pleading softly, I always tell my believers and subjects that if they believe in justice and love, they will usher in a beautiful future. But now, if even I don't believe in the future of the holy light, how can I ask them to believe in it? Aurelia also spoke up, Tyrant, is there anything you can do? Tyrant shook her head slowly, Elune cannot guide souls that do not believe in her. In the end, it was Duque who stepped forward and stretched out his right hand. Chapter 1263. On each of Duke's fingers, there were rings of lightning circling around each of his fingers. His 10 fingers were like a pianist who had stepped onto a stage, sat on a chair and was about to start playing. With the movement of his fingertips, groups of incomparably mysterious magic runes jumped out from his fingers. These runes surrounded Thaddeus' huge head, and Jaina and Elugia were sensitive enough to notice that these runes formed a small magic array that was separating Thaddeus from the surrounding space. It was even possible that it was stripping away the connection between the sleeping Lich King and Thaddeus. This is... Elugia covered her mouth in disbelief. Jaina grabbed her good sister's hand with one hand. Watch carefully how a true master tries to solve an unknown and difficult problem with brand new magic techniques and arrays. Using mature magic was one thing. No matter how complicated or difficult the magic was, it was just following the script. As long as one had enough magic power and magic application skills, they could successfully make the magic circuit in the body communicate well with the elemental channels in the outside world. Basically, it was something that could be improved through more practice. But not now. Everyone could see that because of Cal Thuzad's inhumane and taboo experiments, Thaddeus' soul had been seriously polluted and distorted. Could not even be simply classified as a human soul. Among Thaddeus' soul, there were also other kinds of souls, such as the mountain giant and the twin-headed ogre mage. This unstable combination was the key to Thaddeus' physique that could not be replicated and could store lightning. Thus, from the beginning to the end, except for the overly kind-hearted Kalia, no hero had suggested that Duque save Thaddeus. This was absolutely forcing him to do something he couldn't do. Similarly, not many people knew that Duque had the ability to control souls. After all, someone had infiltrated the Burning Legion and become a Void Duke. This was a dark history, an ancient secret. In fact, with Duque's strength, any incantations and chants were not necessary. But considering the following scene, thinking of his own magic power, it was very likely that the upper limit of everyone's perception of him would be refreshed. Duque still pretended to chant the incantation. Declare, show me, a soul that shines with divine radiance at the end of hell. I have already glimpsed the 3 great virtues that haunt thee. I already know the meaning that fate has given to your sword. If you obey the holy light, obey this will, obey this path, then answer my call. I hereby swear, I am the one who accomplishes all the good in the world. I am the one who cuts off all evil in this world. In the name of the guardian of the scales of justice, Duke Marcus. Regardless of whether these words had any meaning, just the declaration that accompanied a certain person's copy and adaptation from the long night of destiny, coupled with the increasingly dazzling brilliance of the runes around it, was at least full marks. No one knew what it was. Even Jaina couldn't understand the magic circle or the real function of the incantation. However, this didn't stop everyone from feeling a sense of awe. This was especially so for Kalia, who worshipped Duque so much. Her eyes were practically the standard starry eyes of a star chaser. As soon as Duque finished the last word of the incantation, a semi-illusory mass of matter, or rather, a combination of souls, rose from Thaddeus' big head and floated in the air. To outsiders, even Thaddeus' soul, which had been forcibly materialized by Duque's mental power, looked no different from a mass of black mud. It could be said that it was sesame paste, it could be said that it was shit, or it could be said that it was the darkest evil of depravity. Others would feel disgusted just by looking at it, unable to tell which part was which. However, with the help of the system elf, Duque could analyze the soul's energy and magnify it 10,000 times. Theon, Gavin Rad, Kalia, Benedictas, please stand in one direction and purify the excess filth. Duque's request was immediately carried out. They stood in 4 directions, east, west, south and north, and formed a simple holy light purification magic circle further out. A pair of golden palms identical to the shape of Duque's palms appeared out of thin air next to Thaddeus' soul. 10 golden fingers flew up and down, dispelling and dispelling the black part of the soul with the holy light of the soul. If the archery of the three Windrunner sisters was like a butcher dismembering an ox, rapidly dismantling Thaddeus' body. At this moment, Duque was using an even more incredible and mysterious method, as if performing a surgical operation, to remove the impurities in Thaddeus' soul. As soon as the dark soul matter was removed, the soul that floated away from Thaddeus was destroyed by the 4 holy light masters waiting outside with holy light. In less than 10 seconds, most of the huge mass of souls had disappeared, leaving only a burly but bloated humanoid soul. At this moment, Thaddeus' soul was a grayish-bluish purple color. Seeing this, Thean and Gavin Rad frowned at the same time. There were many types of souls. Having been clerics for so long, the 2 holy knights had long known that there were very few truly holy souls and truly fallen souls. Holy light could purify evil, but it could do nothing to the souls of ordinary people. If it was so easy to have saints, then there wouldn't be so many people worshipping Alonce's Fail. Now there was nothing the holy light could do to Thaddeus' remaining soul. At this time, it was Duque's 10 fingers that were surrounded by lightning to show their might. His lightning finger touched the floating soul. Even though it was just a light touch, it caused Thaddeus' soul to wail in pain. Duque seemed to be talking to himself. Thaddeus, leave your twisted soul alone. Even if it is temporarily purified, as long as your resentment and pain still exist in the world, you will still become an existence similar to a vengeful spirit in the near future. I don't know if doing this is salvation for you, but at least it is a way out, and there is a good chance that you can preserve your true self. Come, become my emissary of the elements and live and die with me. Almost at the same time, Thaddeus' soul trembled violently. He was chirping cheerfully in response to Duque's call. Duque no longer hesitated and directly inserted his 10 lightning-filled fingers into Thaddeus' soul. The pain of his soul could even transcend the 5 senses of the human body and be directly perceived by the people around him. But Thaddeus was like a moth flying into a flame, taking the initiative to meet Duque's fingers. Was this a gamble of putting him on the brink of death? Or was this the last chance for redemption after falling? No one would know. The mournful screams of the soul lasted for a full 3 minutes. Finally, a translucent purple-blue soul knelt in front of Duque. Thaddeus greets Master Duque. Chapter 1264. This is a miracle. Thean had thought that he had already matured. After witnessing too many tragedies, his heart had become cold and hard. Unexpectedly at this moment, there were still 2 streams of shameless tears that scrambled to squeeze out of his tear ducts and find a way to escape from his eyes. As a man who had fought on countless battlefields, he should not be crying, but his eyes just did not live up to his expectations. At some point, Thean noticed that Gavin Rad, who usually wore a cynical appearance, also had tear stains on his face. Yo Thean, you're already an uncle. Are you acting like this? Gavin Rad complained first. Bullsh *T. You make it sound like you're not part of the 5 silver saints. Thean punched him, almost making Gavin Rad vomit blood. A full-powered punch from a holy knight was not an exaggeration. You might shit yourself. Of course, the one getting beaten up was also a holy light humanoid creature that could glow, so that was another story. Great. Great. Kalia was so happy that she hugged Jaina and Alicia. These 3 queens, who had been together from time to time since childhood, had their exquisite faces together. If it wasn't for the fact that Du Zhe had already declared his ownership of them, they would definitely be praised as beautiful as a painting by now. Most of the heroines secretly wiped away their tears, and the male heroes also put down their weapons, admiring this rare scene of redemption. Duque had no time to care about the feelings of others. He still looked like a fraud, unfathomable. He stretched out his right hand, which was full of lightning, and gently stroked the head of Thaddeus' soul. Duque's voice was full of a mysterious and illusory feeling. It sounded like a morning bell ringing from a distant building on a foggy morning. It was heart-stirring. Justice may not always be rewarded. However, those who wield the sword of justice, even if they have fallen, deserve redemption. I am not a god, but I still hope to bring more hope to this world that has been ravaged by evil. Thaddeus, answer me, how much of your soul still remembers? How much of your sanity do you still have? On Thaddeus' soul body, others could easily see the tears of the soul that flowed from his eyes. Thaddeus remembers everything from when I became a holy knight, to when I followed Sir Uther back to Lordaeron City, to when Uther was killed, to when I was killed, and then to when I endured the terrifying cataclysm experiment. My bewilderment, my despair, my pain. I remember all of it. When Thaddeus said this, Kalia and Gianna could not help but hold each other's hands tightly. Duque took a deep breath and said slowly, "Then do you still hate them?" The sound wasn't loud, but it seemed to set off a sacred shockwave. Everyone could clearly see a brilliant golden light with the naked eye. With Duque as the center, it spread out in all directions like a curtain wall. I hate him. But I still remember the meaning that fate has given to my sword. Since fate has allowed Master Marcus to be haunted by the three virtues and the word of heaven to redeem my soul. Then for all eternity the sword of I, Thaddeus, shall be the sword of my lord, His Excellency Duke Marcus. Thaddeus bowed his head deeply. Duque exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Fortunately he didn't lose out this time. Otherwise, after investing so much, it would be terrible if he got a brainless fool's soul in exchange. Of course, on the surface, Duque was still full of pretense. "Knight Thaddeus, please kneel." Not only Thaddeus but everyone else also realized what this was. Benedictus seemed to want to say something, but in the end he stopped. Thaddeus' soul had changed. Although it was still emitting a purplish-blue glow, his blurry soul body had become clear. The structure and patterns of the armor on his body could already be clearly distinguished. It was the standard armor of the Silver Hand. He knelt down on one knee excitedly, looked at Duque, and then lowered his noble head that had never been lowered to the Scourge army. Duque drew out his spiral sword, Marcus, Song of Light and Darkness, and solemnly said, "In the name of the Grand Duke of Stormwind and the World Guardian Duke Marcus, I grant you, Thaddeus, the title of Guardian Knight of the Marcus family." After saying that, the blade of the spiral sword lightly touched Thaddeus' left and right shoulders like a dragonfly skimming the water. "Thank you very much, my Lord Marcus." Thaddeus was almost in tears. For a transmigrator like Duque who had no moral integrity, the knighthood was not a big deal at all. On the other hand, this was already the most solemn knighthood ceremony in the world of Azeroth. After the dead of the Scourge army came out, the Church of Holy Light had the fiercest debate about this. It was an ideological debate. The topic of the debate revolved around whether the dead still had glory and power and status when they were alive. This debate involved the Church of Holy Light and all the feudal aristocratic ruling classes of the kingdom, and the final conclusion was that the dead could only have a false reputation and were not qualified to have any wealth or power. Because the dead could also keep the wealth they had when they were alive, then what did the descendants they left behind when they were alive eat and use? Of course, the result could only be that the living returned to the living and the dead returned to the dead. Therefore, Duque could not make Thaddeus a knight of the kingdom. Duque took advantage of this loophole. The so-called guardian knight, to put it bluntly, was a retainer and was not protected by the kingdom's laws. The lord could do whatever he wanted. After all, the king's vassal was not the king's vassal. However, Duque was also making a huge profit. If Thaddeus' soul was not destroyed, he would definitely protect the family for generations to come. The price was just a little divinity that Duque had gotten from the Wind Prince. It seemed that the knighthood was not much different from that of an ordinary knight, but for Thaddeus, who had been tortured and a lonely soul for a long time, this was the greatest and final redemption. At some point, there was a warm applause around him, especially from the two great holy knights. They had almost broken their gauntlets from the applause. Speaking of which, to be able to complete his redemption under the witness of two first-generation holy knights, known as the 5 Silver Saints, Thaddeus was also a happy guy. He was so excited that he could only say, "Thank you." "All right, Thaddeus, your essence is now an elemental soul. I was just acting on the urgency of the matter just now. The specific adjustments will have to be done when we return to the Mage Tower. I'll take you back to the Corazon first." Duque had no choice but to hold this guy back. "Understood. I will listen to your orders, my lord." Thaddeus replied respectfully, "Yes, there are some things. My lord, you'd better take a look." He saw the staff that Thaddeus had dug out from a pile of junk. Sunset Tower. Duque was pleasantly surprised. Chapter 1265. Duque was a little conflicted. Because of the skewed history, he couldn't figure out whether he was fighting a level 60 or a level 80 Naxxramas. This was because Sunset Tower was a typical item from a level 80 Naxxramas. Although Duque couldn't use it himself, the quality of this staff wasn't bad. It had powerful spell power and casting speed bonuses, plus decent endurance and spirit bonuses. It was a good staff for a priest. The design was also not bad. There were 2 sun-like golden rings at the head and tail, plus 8 small golden awls in the shape of radiation. When it was waved, it looked like it was waving 2 suns, one big and one small. Benedict didn't want this thing, so Duque might as well let Kalia take advantage of it. After Duque took control of Naxxrama's main control system, going to and from Karazhan became common. Duke took Thaddeus back for a trip. He saw Khadgar. "Oh, my dear master, what did you bring back this time? A heroic spirit? A special soul infused with the power of Logia lightning?" Although there were enough strange existences in Karazhan, there were too many of them. "I can't handle it anymore." Khadgar, the ghost mage, put his hands on his hips and kept complaining to Duque. Duque blinked, looking like he was in a difficult position. "Fine. Let's not talk about the brainless curator and the righteous saintess. Just Majordomo Executus, who was a fire demon boss, and Farina, the shadow witch, gave Khadgar a great sense of pressure. Now there was a thunder knight with a special soul. Khadgar felt a headache coming on. Duque sent the other elemental emissaries away and asked Khadgar, "They didn't do anything, right?" "No, the fire demon kept asking me if there were any slaves he could order around. He wanted to get you a fire elemental furnace. I gave him a small team of heroic spirit warriors to capture the monsters that came out of the spatial crack. If he can successfully enslave them, he'll give them to his new subordinates." Khadgar then rolled his eyes. Then that lady Farina, who looks like a human but is actually a shadow creature, started to ask you what kind of woman you like after I refused to let her into your bedroom. I'm so annoyed. I told you that you've recently become addicted to playing with female demons. The higher the position, the better. Slap. A certain someone slapped the back of a certain ghost mage's head with his right hand. "Be careful or I'll hit you," Duque said coldly. "Bullshit. You already hit him." Karthika's eyes were seeing stars. But this time it was another slap from his left hand. "Be careful, I'll hit you again." "You bastard." Khadgar felt wronged. However, Karthika was the kind of person who would tear the roof tiles if he wasn't disciplined for 3 days. Duque was really afraid that he would see Farina cosplay with him later. Now that Duque had used the divinity in his hands to create 3 elemental emissaries, it was already a pain in the ass. When he had saved Thaddeus just now, he had only done it because he felt like it. Now he realized that he had fallen into a trap. If he wanted to maintain a true elemental emissary, then that meant that Duque had to also grasp the natural element's divinity laws. Apart from the basic fire, ice and arcane spells, there was also the wind and thunder elements and the shadow elements. In order to balance things out, he had to add the light element. If one more domain was added, the difficulty of entering the divine realm would be doubled. Right now, Duque was already at the normal difficulty multiplied by 2 to the 6th power. Duque wailed in his heart. "Damn, I'm not good at math, but I know that this is 64 times. Although Duque, who had seen the ancient war, knew that an ordinary demigod with a single domain was useless. Like the wild boar god, a third-rate void lord could kill it. But even 64 times, that was too difficult. And as for the direction he was working towards, Duque was still a little confused. If it was fire, ice, and arcane spells, he could still be considered a god of mages or something, but what about 6 domains? However, he would cross the bridge when he came to it. After comforting Thaddeus, Duque returned to Naxxrama's and met up with the team. Because they controlled most of the strongholds, the team did not have to run and directly arrived outside the hall where the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were. Before opening the door, Duque was sensitive to the change in the atmosphere of the team. The depressing atmosphere of Thaddeus becoming a monster because of his fall, and the final redemption of his soul, filled the entire team with a relaxed atmosphere. After all, the remaining 2 groups of enemies were in a state of closing the door and beating the dogs. As an honest and reliable young man, although Duque could not do anything to Cal Thizad in the independent space, he could still trick the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He opened a portal and then pulled in hundreds of tons of holy water from the holy city of Stratholme, all of which were poured into the ventilation pipes of the hall. The undead could not eat or breathe, just relying on the power of their souls to maintain their vitality for hundreds of years. But Duque did not believe that they could still swim in the pool of holy light. The holy water blessed by the holy light was like acid to the undead. Bathing in holy water was definitely not a pleasant experience. Although the atmosphere in the team was a little too relaxed, Duque was also very confident in his plan, so he did not intend to alarm the team members or anything. "Okay everyone, do you remember to order?" Duque asked. "Yes." The 14 powerhouses answered in unison. "Okay. Let's go. We'll farm undead horses. Oh no, Einherjar war horses." Duque was too smooth with his words, saying it was undead horses. Although in the game, players took glory in farming undead horses, Duque was in the righteous camp. Before the Ebon Blade Knights turned over a new leaf and gained the recognition of mortals, undead horses were taboo. Of course, Duque had promised that he could use undead horses as raw materials. After purification he could summon the souls of Tyrion and the others' mounts and make them into Einherjar war horses. This idea was well received by the 2 first-generation paladins. After all, horses usually matured after the age of 4. Even if a warhorse did not die on the battlefield, it was rare to ride it until the age of 15. After 15 it was basically an old horse, unable to bear the burden. Gavin, Rad and Tyrion had fought on the battlefield for 20 years, and lost count of the number of warhorses they had changed. They also did not want to change warhorses again and again. After a long time together there would be feelings no matter what. The 2 paladins did not take Duque's words to heart. After all, Duque had used his own strength to forcibly transform the shadow energy in his body into a wholly extraordinary existence. As for some of the strange habits of this great hero of the Alliance, they selectively ignored it. The huge stone door, which was a full 10 meters thick, began to open with a rumbling sound under the push of the Titan's mechanism. Just as Duque remembered, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse silently rode undead horses, standing in the middle of the hall like statues. Chapter 1266. However, Duque didn't expect that the holy water, which was supposed to reach half a person's height, had disappeared without a trace. No, it didn't disappear without a trace. A skull emitting a chilling aura had sealed all the holy water like an ice wall on the 4 sides of the wall. If it was a normal boss fight, Duque wouldn't have such a feeling. However, the instant he saw the 4 horsemen, Duque was alarmed. He wasn't the only one. Beside him, Magni had already transformed into deities descent even without his reminder. The 2 paladins took large strides forward, tightly gripping the divine weapons in their hands. "Careful." With Duque in the lead, at least 5 voices shouted out with the same mournful tone. Almost at the same time the red warning popped up on Duque's retina. The 4 horsemen completed their transformation from extreme speed to extreme speed. This felt a little ridiculous. Originally, a warhorse needed time to accelerate. One could see the warhorse bulging its thigh muscles and using the strength of its muscles to accelerate itself and the rider on top of it. However, the 4 horsemen were different. Their movements were even faster than supercars. From a standstill to a speed of 100 km per hour, it took only a second. This gave most of the non-melee professions the illusion that the 4 of them were still standing on the stage in the middle, almost 100 meters away from them. Baron Rivendare quickly circled around Magni, who was attempting to block his way. Even though the Dwarf King had activated the warrior skill Intercept, his large body brought about a slight decrease in agility, which was perfectly grasped by the Baron. The undead warhorse under him was like a supercar drifting, easily evading Magni's Balrog hammer and rapidly closing in on Kalia. The great sword emitting an evil aura was prepared to pierce through her chest. Rivendare didn't feel that this was a despicable act. After all, he was charging from the front and not attacking from behind. If he didn't kill the Alliance's healer, the battle would likely drag on for a long time. The long and sharp rune greatsword easily pierced through Kalia's holy word, shield. However, just as his blade was about to pierce through her heart, his vision suddenly blurred. At the critical moment, Duque hugged Kalia and pulled her into his arms. Not only that, spiraling sword also slashed at Rivendell. Duque's movements were so swift that he even made use of Rivendell's relative speed. The divine sword emitted a golden radiance as it accurately pierced into Rivendell's chest, emitting an intense golden light. To almost all undying beings, being struck by a divine weapon of the sacred type, even if it didn't penetrate their heads, would result in instant death due to the damage to both their soul and body. If it was an abomination-type undying existence known for its abnormal vitality and durability, it might be able to endure it. For the Death Knights, the chest where the soul fire was placed was also a fatal spot. However, not only was Rivendell not destroyed by Duque's sword, it didn't even turn its head. What flowed out from the punctured part was not blood, but an unknown object that resembled a black shadow. The four horsemen of the apocalypse did not care and even had the time to grab and slash with their swords. Death's grasp, and cleave. Even Duque almost fell for it. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Duque conjured two identical illusions of Duque and Kalia and grabbed them towards Rivendell. Humph. Duque retreated again and again at the same time casting all 18 Magus hands simultaneously. In the next second 18 instant cast, Flame Blast blasted over. Even with the undead warhorse, Death Knights were never known for their speed. Duque's Flame Blast fireballs were already very fast. With Rivendell's speed, it was impossible for him to evade them. The torrential torrent of pyroblast fireballs shot out at a speed that far exceeded his ability to dodge. Yet Rivendell was actually able to disperse the fireballs with his left hand. It was as unimaginable as a mortal catching a flying bullet with his bare hands. Of course, the Death Knight also paid the price. Every muscle on his left hand was torn, and his gauntlets were also broken. His bones were also shattered and scattered. However, even though he was a Death Knight due to his blood innate ability, his regenerative abilities were much faster than his injuries. Not only the injury on his arm, but the fact that the gauntlets were instantly repaired caused Duque's hair to stand on end. However, Duque was very clear that Rivendell definitely did not suck any blood. What the hell is this? On the other side, Lord Kurtaz and Jaina were clashing. Duque's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. What did he just see? Jaina was clearly a Breaking Dawn mage. In the domain of magic, there were only a handful of people who could match up to her. However, Lord Kurtaz's super meteor fireball was suppressing Jaina. This was not a geographical factor. Naxxramas did not reject the molten core of the frost elemental. Here, except for the shadow elemental, the other elements had equal opportunities to be used. Now it was Kurtaz, the dwarven Death Knight, who was bullying Jaina with a higher purity and greater amount of fire elemental. The gap was so big that it almost made Jaina despair. If it was not for Lucia helping her and Gavinrad fiercely using the wind sword to cut down Kurtaz's melee attacks, Jaina would have probably been defeated in 2 moves. On the other side, Tyrion was also having a headache. He was facing Sir Zeliek. Whether Tyrion was willing to admit it or not, he had now finally seen for himself what it meant for the undead to play with the holy light. It was very ironic. His soul should have fallen, but because of some kind of purity in his heart he still obtained the recognition of the holy light. Zeliek attacked Tyrion with Divine Wrath and Holy Arrow. It looked like a civil war between paladins, very ridiculous. Finally, there was Duchess Blomo. Her skill was the most insidious of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Unknowingly, her feet would fall into the evil nether domain. If you were not careful for even a second, you would not even know when the shadow domain under your feet turned into a black sludge. By the time you reacted, you would often be swallowed by the dark void. Vanessa almost fell for it. If she did not have Shadow Cloak, and forcibly used magic immunity to save her life for a short period of time, she would probably be lying on the ground. However, the most terrifying thing was not the single attack of the 4 horsemen, but when the 4 of them stood together, there would be 4 terrible halo effects that would constantly superimpose curses on the entire alliance of heroes. Separate them. Duque shouted at the top of his voice. Chapter 1267. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse had to fight separately. This was common knowledge to every Warcraft player who had fought Naxxramas. It was a tactic that had to be carried out. After the 4 horsemen split up, any one of them could only be considered second-rate powerhouses. With the 4 horsemen together, they would be a top-tier combination that would give anyone a headache. Before Duque had transmigrated, it was because he had led his team to destroy the 4 horsemen and clear Naxxramas that he had become a famous team leader in the entire server and even the 4 servers. Moreover, the 4 horsemen in front of him were definitely not normal. Individually, they were extremely powerful, not to mention when the 4 halo-like curses were stacked together. Every horseman's mark was a layer of additional damage imposed on the Alliance powerhouses. It was not obvious at first. The mark stacked once every 12 seconds. Once 4 layers were stacked, it would be 4 times the damage. At this time they would basically be insta-killed. 5 layers of marks meant death. On the other hand, as long as they exceeded 60 yards, the effects of the halos would disappear after 12 seconds. Therefore the 4 horsemen had to be split up. The entire team rotated like a wheel, taking turns to attack each horseman. Normally, separating the enemies shouldn't be a problem. But imagination was one thing and reality was another. It was unknown if someone had instructed them or if they had thought of it themselves, but the 4 death knights on their undead warhorses moved about in a daze, constantly dodging Magni's charge and the other 3 paladins' attacks. They rejected any competition of strength and kept the entire alliance's hero group within the effective range of the 4 marks. At first, Magni and the others didn't think that the marks Duque spoke of were so terrifying. But when the 4 marks stacked to the 3rd layer, Jaina was the first to fall. Lord Kurtaz's meteor smashed down with a loud bang, and the terrifying destructive power was already 4 times stronger. This wasn't something a newly advanced Breaking Dawn Great Wizard could withstand. The clash between the ice tornado and the fire meteor ended with the frost elemental's complete defeat. If Jaina hadn't used the top-grade equipment left behind by Duque to activate a talisman that temporarily increased magic damage and risked the damage to the magic circuit in her body to throw a second ice tornado to forcefully offset the aftermath of the fire meteor, perhaps Wuxia and Sasha in Jaina's team would have been defeated. The other groups were also in danger. Because the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse could not be pulled apart, they had no choice but to stack more cursed halos. "Boss, no." Gavin Rad was the first to shout. "I'm fine, but the others are dead." Magni, who was almost immune to magic, was also panicking. "Is there a plan B?" Even someone as cautious and calm as Thean couldn't sit still. "Do you think you can have a plan B just because you say so?" As expected, reality and the game were 2 different things. The mark of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, even if it was a group of heroes with top-quality equipment and a few paladins with 1 chance of invincibility, couldn't be stacked 6 times. The hesitation and panic of the Alliance experts fell into the eyes of Baron Rivendare, a true fallen who willingly became a Death Knight. Rivendell, who had been silent since the start of the battle, finally spoke. His voice was filled with malevolence. Feeling uneasy? Was he afraid? It was too late. The living. Only eternal death is the end of all things. None of you can escape the fate of death. Come join us. Under the command of the great Lich King Arthas, we shall establish an eternal kingdom on this land. His tone was filled with the smell of a charlatan. And a fart. Following Rivendell's words, the solid tiles on the ground trembled slightly. Every expert of the Alliance reflexively looked down at their feet. In an instant, at least 10 slender shadow spears were summoned on almost every square meter of the ground. Like a primordial forest rising from the ground, the razor-sharp shadow spears stabbed at every Alliance expert. If they didn't do anything, the spears would pierce through their bodies one by one, turning them into human flesh sashimi. If they were ordinary professionals, they would probably be annihilated in an instant. Consecration. Without even a tenth of a second of hesitation, the 3 paladins activated their skills. They infused holy energy into the ground and countered Rivendell's ultimate skill. However, it was unknown if it was the effect of the mark or something else. Obviously, the range of the paladins' consecration could only protect their party members within 25 yards. Any further and it would be useless. Riadaline's strength was slightly weaker. Her holy energy could only protect a mere 10 yards. Anyone who wanted to leave the range of the paladin's protection would have to face the terrifying shadow skill alone unless they could fly. Seeing that his skill didn't kill any Alliance expert, Rivendell wasn't annoyed. He had already achieved his goal of delaying the enemy. If Duque was still the newly arrived transmigrator, perhaps he would really kneel down and lick the fool's boots. Speaking of his glorious past, Duque was someone who had slept with a queen, tamed a female dragon, and had a harem in every Alliance country. How could he abandon the benefits of swordsmanship to become a rotten Death Knight? What kind of joke was that? The leader was enraged. No, it was Duque who was enraged. "It doesn't matter what Kel Thuzad enhanced you with. You want to take care of us? You *T horsemen of the apocalypse aren't qualified." As if responding to Duque's roar, both sides in the hall felt the ground tremble. Without giving any time to react, The floor that seemed to remain unchanged for 10,000 years collapsed. Save me, I'm going to fall to my death. Having lost his footing, Magni was so scared that he almost peed his pants. After falling 100 meters, he suddenly realized that the top of his head was filled with flames. 1, 2, 10. They were all pure-blooded firehawks with beautiful flames lingering around them. Faster, thief. I actually forgot about it. I'm also an awesome person with a flying mount. Although his reaction in the hero party was slow, he wasn't an idiot. Magni roared, "Come out, my rock." A small firebird immediately jumped out from Magni's wrist, and in less than a tenth of a second, it grew into a huge firebird with a wingspan of more than 8 meters. It nimbly flew to his rapidly falling body and caught him in his arms. 3 seconds later, the Alliance's powerhouses all flew to Magni's side, who was still in shock. Haha. I can't take it anymore. I will definitely tell Kudrin about how you almost peed your pants and let him mock you for the rest of his life. Having just escaped from death, Gavin Rad's mouth was cheap again. Chapter 1268. Gavin Rad only said a few words. Next, everyone looked at Duque again. The other party is obviously not in line with the intelligence. What should we do next? Jaina asked. Duque's eyes narrowed into a line, and he could not help but think to himself. Sure enough, there was no boss in this world waiting to be slaughtered. The situation in front of them was indeed a variable, but a good variable. As long as the team was not wiped out, then the variable also meant challenges and surprises. Although this surprise almost turned into shock and fear, no matter how Kalthazad thought, he would never have thought that I had such a trick up my sleeve. Phew. Duque let out a long sigh of relief. With a snap of his fingers, the dark space below suddenly lit up and he said loudly, "Do you see the situation below?" Everyone looked and immediately sighed in their hearts. This was the advantage of turning the enemy into one's own home ground. The floor, which looked extremely sturdy just now, collapsed and fell to the ground. In the unknown lower level of Naxxramas, the huge square space was divided into 4 small squares of equal size. Between each square space, there was a wall nearly 10 meters thick that was reinforced by Titan runes, and it was impossible to connect to each other. Except for one square space that was completely shrouded in black mist, in the other 2 spaces, Lord Kurtaz, Sir Zeliek and Duchess Blamo could clearly be seen. Their respective radiances were very easy to recognize. Kurtaz has someone to deal with. Let's focus on the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, Duque ordered. This mechanism is amazing. Although she did not have much contact with Duque, Riadaline only had admiration for this alliance commander who had taken away her queen. But thinking about it, since Duque could control Farina and make most of the Death Knights and abominations fall into the temple of Courage to become food for the insects, then he could naturally control the mechanism of the fortress and forcibly break up the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Tyron's eyes were full of curiosity. Duque, did you think of this a long time ago? Or did you improvise? Duque's face was a little gloomy. I was going to train the team. On the other hand, the Death Knights and their undead warhorses couldn't fly, but Death's Grasp was indeed useful. If it were any other profession that did not have life-saving skills such as slow fall, they would definitely fall into meat paste. However, the horsemen of the apocalypse used Death's Grasp to grab onto the protrusions on the walls around him when he fell and descended safely step by step. Lord Kurtaz rode the undead warhorse under him and landed lightly in the huge square space that was at least 200 meters long and wide. He had no choice but to descend because he saw the pure-blood fire eagles that the Alliance experts were riding on. Seeing Kurtaz's dead face and constipated expression, Onyxia was amused. If it wasn't for her hateful master forcing her to fight against a strong enemy, she wouldn't want to do it. On the contrary, she loved bullying noobs the most. Come on. Let's play. How about I let you use one of my claws? The evil black dragon princess seemed to be fair, but this was like inviting a guest to a farmhouse on a hot day, and saying that there was a freshly burned pit so it's hot. It was completely a scam. The opponent's best attack was useless. But Kurtaz didn't know any other elemental magic apart from fire, and then let a small Death Knight play hand-to-hand combat with an ancient demigod dragon. And this guy wasn't called Arl Fool. That was really ah. The entire space echoed with Lord Kurtaz's miserable screams. On the other side, in the 3 square fields, the remaining horsemen of the apocalypse welcomed the Alliance powerhouses. Every time, 5 powerhouses jumped out of the portal that suddenly opened and quickly attacked the horsemen of the apocalypse. Then, without waiting for the horsemen's mark to stack, they immediately jumped away through the portal that suddenly appeared. Chapter 1269. Separated from their companions, surrounded by a group of strange enemies in a strange place, and less than 20 seconds after falling, the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse could not help but feel their hearts tighten. Lord Kurtaz was in trouble. They did not know what enemy he had encountered, but it was obvious that it was a terrifying enemy that he could not contend against because the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse sensed that Kurtaz had already activated Death's Rampart. Death's Rampart was a skill that Kel Thuzad had specially bestowed upon them after Naxxramas fell. It turned out that this skill was similar to the warrior's shield wall, which could greatly reduce damage from the outside world. After Kel Thuzad's modification, this skill used highly concentrated shadow power stored in a soul gem to forcefully create a barrier to resist attacks from the outside world. If the group of Alliance powerhouses in front of them all focused fire, they could resist for at least 20 seconds. However, with the Alliance powerhouses taking turns to appear, it was impossible for Duque's group to have the spare time to deal with Kurtaz. Then who was it? Of course, the horsemen of the apocalypse did not know that Duque had shamelessly let the boss Xianxia in as well. Yo, little bone shorty, don't die so quickly. Play with me again. With a teasing voice, Xianxia swept her dragon tail over. The Death Knights were one with their horses and their movements were agile, but that was only for Alliance powerhouses without mounts. They could not fly, and it was even more impossible for them to jump into the air, do 9 backflips and then stand steadily on the ground like rangers or thieves. Facing a dragon tail or dragon wings that were more than 15 meters long, Kurtaz was in a difficult situation. How terrifying was the dragon's combat instincts. When the dragon tail was swung around, it was like a large battering ram. But Xianxia's dragon tail was much more terrifying than a siege hammer. Not only did it have a longer effective range, but it also had long and incomparably hard bone spurs. It was not a siege hammer at all, but a meteor hammer used by gods. With a swing of her tail, it was simply earth-shattering. It was impossible to dodge, so the bitter Death Knight could only take it head-on. Who knew that Xianxia was also a thief? Her first attack seemed to be a sweep of her dragon tail, but in the end, a dragon claw slapped down from the opposite direction, directly breaking the undead warhorse's limbs. Hearing the cracking sound of the undead warhorse's leg bone, Lord Kurtaz's heart broke. Ah! Lord Kurtaz took out a battle axe from his portal bag and slashed at the dragon's claw, but the dragon's tail arrived again. Hi! Watch my black dragon home run. Xianxia smirked and sent Kurtaz flying with a swipe of her tail. Kurtaz was a dwarf paladin when he was alive, and after he died he was just a dwarf that needed to be killed. As a result, he was directly smashed into the steep and solid wall by the dragon race's tremendous strength. The huge impact almost made him fall apart on the spot. He slid down the wall, but before he hit the ground, the huge dragon wings had already smacked him. The impact, which was enough to shatter an ordinary professional into pieces on the spot and measured in tons, instantly slammed half of his body into the wall. Yo! Could it be that after slapping the wall you can't even pull it out? Xianxia grinned sinisterly. Although she had already obediently become Duque's mount, as a black dragon who came from the evil faction and had a bad heart, she had accumulated a lot of pressure, and now was a good time for her to vent. Shaking her head, the black dragon princess said, it seems that I've also been taught badly by that damn master. Why is my mouth full of his lines? Kurtaz struggled. I swear allegiance to the great Lich King. What? Before the miserable horseman of the apocalypse could finish speaking, he was smacked by a dragon's tail, and he was directly smacked into the death barrier state. Bolsh Asterisky. You actually want such a beautiful me to be an ugly bone dragon. Bone shorty, congratulations, you've angered me. Xianxia showed off her female might. She did not know that according to history she would later really be resurrected by her father as an ugly undead dragon. However, the throbbing of fate was like a magical sixth sense that constantly tugged at her heartstrings, telling her that only Duque could escape this nightmarish fate. She couldn't help but attack even more fiercely. When Xianxia went to bully the noobs, Duque finally formed the attack cycle of his dreams. The 15 heroes split into 3 attack groups, and attacked the remaining 3 horsemen in a wave formation. Duque followed Magni, Riadaline, Sylvanus and Vanessa. Are you here to obstruct the great cause of our master again? Why can't you see through it? Only death is eternal, Rivendell roared, attempting to use his signature greatsword to slash at Duque. Duque was annoyed by this brainwashing roar and immediately retorted, Bullsh *T, what's so good about the undead tribe? If you have the ability, ask Arthas to nurture a low-level skeleton soldier into a Death Knight. How dare you ask your grandfather to join a race that has no future? Ignoring Queen Sylvie's laughter, Duque continued to complain in his mind. This isn't a game where you can train a puny level 1 Forsaken to level 110 like a player. Bones could be leveled up, but that didn't hold true in the world of Azeroth. One's aptitude in life determined one's potential in death. If one was trash in life, they could only be cannon fodder in death. Therefore, to a Lich King fanatic like Rivendell, Duque only had one thing to say to him. You'd better die early, don't obstruct the planet's rotation. Unfortunately, as long as Duque didn't break into the realm of divinity, he wouldn't be immune to Rivendell's mark. After stacking up 4 layers, Duque led his party away. Of course, in the original version, the simplest strategy against the 4 horsemen was to have 4 tanks tank the boss while 1 tank took over. However, Duque cheated by splitting the 4 horsemen into 4 separate spaces. He even used a teleportation door as a means of movement, thus simplifying the strategy. Don't run. Seeing that Duque and the rest were trying to escape, Rivendell naturally gave chase. However, chasing didn't mean that he could catch up. Magni slammed his hammer on the floor, and the shattered tiles emitted the distinct power of thunder. The intense arcs of electricity forced Rivendell to slow down. A heroic warrior was this simple and violent when he acted shamelessly. Not only that, there was also Duque's decelerate. The two of them made Rivendell's movements as slow as a snail. By the time he regained his mobility, the 5 fleeing fellows had already jumped into the teleportation door and disappeared. Almost at the same time, less than 40 yards behind him, the 5 fellows jumped out from another teleportation door. Taking turns. Chapter 1270. Come. Fight it out with your grandpa Gavinrad. A guy named Paladin or Rogue brandished a huge divine artifact longsword, surging with the power of wind and thunder as he charged over. For a moment, Rivendell didn't want to waste his time with these guys, because the final result of a continuous battle would definitely be the destruction of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Unfortunately, he had to fight even if he didn't want to. Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Windseeker, was not a simple melee weapon. With a swing of the huge sword, Rivendell felt as if the air around him had been pushed away. Even the undead warhorse under him seemed to have been sucked into a black hole. His body became sluggish, and even the powerful undead warhorse could not move for a second. At this time, a new 5-man squad had already closed in on him at high speed and engaged him in a fierce battle. Damn it! Rivendell cursed. Who is he? Who is she? Both of them are so strong. It wasn't that Rivendell didn't do his homework and couldn't tell who the experts of the Alliance were, but he didn't have the luxury to do so. The palpitations in his soul made him panic. He could clearly feel that the distance between him and the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse was constantly widening. At the same time, his strength was rapidly weakening. Has the secret finally been discovered? Unfortunately, Gavinrad's wind sword, Aurelia's wind and thunder arrows, Vanessa's deadly twin daggers, Jaina's large fireball, and Benedictus's holy light punishment all rained down on him, making him unable to take care of himself. Oh no, he didn't even know how many bones he had broken. At this time, Duque's squad had already run through the portal to beat up Duchess Blommu. If one were to say who was the most difficult to deal with among the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the first would definitely be that damn dwarf Kurtaz. That level of fire magic, if it carried more than 4 layers of imprints, not to mention Jaina, even Duque would feel weak. The vicious curse imprint could directly reduce the opponent's magic resistance. If it were a mage, it would reduce the magic output of the magic circuit. The second most difficult to deal with was Baron Rivendell. The remaining 2, on the other hand, only had a single attack method and none of them were capable of killing in an instant. They were practically playing around. So when Riadaline injected holy light into the ground so that the team could surround and beat Blommu, Queen Sheena suddenly asked, What is going on with the four horsemen of the apocalypse? I feel that they are too weak. Of course. Do you know that they're already over 3,000 yards away from each other? 3,000 yards. It didn't seem like much, and he didn't count it when he had a flying mount, but this distance was indeed not short. Queen Sylvanas was smart. She immediately thought of something. Their strength is inversely proportional to the distance between them. The greater the distance, the weaker they are. Yes, because they have a stingy boss. Before Duque could finish, Blamu had already slashed down with a rune sword. You are not allowed to insult Sir Kel, Thizad. Poor guy, he's been brainwashed. If you were freed from the Lich King's mental control, would you still say that? As Duque complained, he swung his hand and a high elemental fireball smashed into the horseman's face, directly sending her flying. This time Duque was right. The four horsemen of the apocalypse suddenly strengthened for a reason. After fighting for so long, the system Elf had also analyzed for so long, and the final conclusion made Duque feel a slight pain in the ass. Kel'Thuzad had injected divinity into all four of them. Of course, it was not some high-purity good stuff. It was unknown whether this divinity was obtained from Northrend or plundered from other places. It had characteristics similar to Zhou Xian's animal evil god, crazy and full of a sense of chaos. If this power had to be described as similar, then Duque would definitely think that the closest answer was the blood of an Abyss Lord. It could indeed greatly increase the strength and destructive power of the user. Replacing it was the gradual loss of rationality, falling into madness and killing, unable to extricate themselves. Using this on the calm, cruel and powerful Death Knights, Cal was at his wits' end. Moreover, this thing was not just one portion, but an extremely powerful chaos divinity that was forcibly divided into four parts. The consequence of being divided into four, in addition to each having different characteristics, also triggered a perception similar to that of twins. However, too far away would cause the divinity to weaken, which was something Kel'Thuzad did not expect. So on the surface, Kel'Thuzad threw out the names of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, such as war, massacre, hunger, and death. In fact, this was to cover up the failure of this experiment. Of course, it was impossible for others to discover this small difference. Duque had the system monitoring the data of the four horsemen from beginning to end. When the system had an answer, it just so happened that the team was in danger, so Duque decisively tore down the hall where the four horsemen of the apocalypse were and forcibly broke them up. Now Duque frowned. What's wrong? Cal almost found a chance to escape. Indeed, after eating fire, wind, and shadow divinity in one go, Duque was already a 1-star Breaking Dawn Archmage just based on the total amount of magic power. But Duque's current combat power was only around 2-star. After all, apart from the fire divinity, Duque did not dare to use the other two. The core of his power was the mage. Before the foundation of the mage was stable, abusing the divinity of other elements was likely to break the balance of the magic circuit in his body. That was really courting death. In a situation where the divinity was unbalanced, Duque could use at most 70% of his strength. Under this premise, he had to take into account the control of Naxxramas, ensure the blockade of the space where Kel'Thuzad was, and open the portal to teleport the 3 squads. At this moment, Duque's individual combat power was only half a notch higher than Jaina's. Just now, Duque was ruthless and rewarded Blamu with a big fireball, and Cal almost found a chance to break through. There was no other way. Before dealing with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Duque could only be a good baby. As the battle went on, the Alliance powerhouses all felt the weakness of the horsemen of the apocalypse. Even though they had activated Death Rampart, which absorbed almost all damage 3 times, the sluggishness of their movements, the decline in the power of their attacks, and the disorder of the elemental attacks they released could not be hidden from the experienced Alliance hero squad. When Death Rampart was activated for the 3rd time, Duque looked up to the sky and shouted, "Onyxia, stop playing." Silence rippled in the air and then 3 seconds passed. Suddenly, a special portal opened in the void. Unlike the bluish-purple arcane portal that Duque often used, this portal was made of flames and was quite large. It looked like the main entrance of the Storm Fortress. Countess Katrana, who exuded sexiness and swaying charm, had a snow-white left arm on her waist, but her right hand was holding a huge head that exuded a flame aura. Chapter 1271. Following that, the Countess flung her arm. The scorched skull, still shrouded in flame elements, drew a perfect arc in the air and landed beside Baron Rivendare's feet. Kurtaz. Even though his face was beyond recognition, even though his soul sensed his broken chains, Rivendare's movements turned sluggish at the sight of his comrade's demise. Disregarding his divinity, he knew his own capabilities. If not for his master reviving him out of loyalty, he would still be a vengeful spirit by the Sunwell, or perhaps he would have been annihilated by the holy light. Unfortunately, it was impossible for him to reverse this defeat. No, he roared and launched a suicidal charge at Magni, who had descended from the heavens. Humph. Magni was rather displeased. He had already noticed that Rivendare's scarlet soul pupils weren't looking at him but Duque. He didn't roar. Instead, Magni remained strangely silent. His left hand that was holding the axe first smashed out with a hammer. That's right. It was a hammer. Galestorm's hammer, formed from lightning. If it was in the past, Rivendare would have used his astounding horsemanship to maneuver his undead warhorse to nimbly dodge. But now he couldn't care less. If this dragged on, his end would still be destruction. Might as well give it a shot. Intense lightning bolts exploded on the undead warhorse. Violent lightning snakes wriggled around the undead warhorse. Even though the undead warhorse was a spirit, it couldn't help but twitch under such a powerful elemental attack. However, Rivendare's body had already entered a jumping state. His posture was as perfect as Grom Hellscream. You want to go over? Have you asked for my permission? At this moment, Magni's right arm abruptly swung. His speed was fast and his strength was ferocious. It was as though Magni was swinging a gigantic plate. Yes, a plate made entirely out of flames. Hand of Savras Balrog Ragnaros had unleashed its might. The divine warhammer transformed into a waterfall of flames as it smashed towards Rivendare. Die, Duque. Rivendare bellowed malevolently as though he didn't see the gigantic flaming warhammer crashing towards his lower body. Bang! Sparks flew in all directions. The leader of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Rivendell, had half of his body turned into charcoal, disappearing into the wind. Who would have thought that when the warhammer swung down, Rivendell's sword-wielding upper body actually maintained its original trajectory and continued pouncing towards Duque. Vanessa was the first to notice something was wrong. She immediately threw a dozen flying daggers. Queen Sylvan's thunderbolt bolt struck Rivendell's chest accurately at the crimson soulfire. Then it was Riadaline's hammer of wrath, which was infused with the will of the Holy Knight Destroyer. The golden holy light hammer directly smashed onto the back of the Death Knight, and the sound of bones breaking could be heard. But Rivendell was still desperate. At this moment, everyone finally realized that Rivendell had abandoned all defenses and relied solely on his body to withstand the attacks. It was all for the sake of perishing together with Duque. Pfft. Vanessa suddenly burst out laughing without a care in the world. A mere horseman of the apocalypse with low HP wanted to fight to the death with her immoral and beastly Duke Master who kept all his life-saving skills? Was the Death Knight's brain damaged? When Vanessa turned to look at Duque, she was shocked to see Duque not evading. Instead, he wielded his staff in his left hand and his sword in his right as he strode forward. Damn it! Is my master addicted to being a swordsman? Swordsman? Perhaps. Humans are despicable. Humans are despicable. Humans are despicable. The feeling of being one with the despicable wasn't bad at all. If he could defeat the boss, he would never allow it to reach its peak. This was Duque's maxim. But sometimes Duque would let his emotions get the better of him. For example, now. In terms of emotions, he could tolerate those who were afraid of death and willingly become the Lich King's servant in order to obtain eternal life. However, he absolutely disliked those who sold out their teammates, their master, and even their own subjects for the sake of their so-called immortality, turning them into undead. This was what Duque told himself. I will destroy him completely. Duque struck. It was an ordinary stab that even a 3-month-old militia could execute. The strange spiral-shaped, screw-like long sword pierced Rivendell's head. It was as though Rivendell was sending himself to his death. Duque's sword pierced through the pale face of the nobleman who kept spitting out crazily. Like a watermelon, the dried brain matter and shrunken brain matter splattered all over the ground. But not a single drop or piece of rotten flesh could penetrate Duque's ice barrier and stain Duque's blue and white magician robes. Amateurs enjoyed the show while experts observed the artistry. Riadeline and Magni could only sense that something was amiss. Only Vanessa and Queen Sylvanas sensed that Duque seemed to have vanished in that instant. It wasn't a physical disappearance. Duque could still be sensed, seen, heard, and smelled. But it was as though Duque had vanished for a split second. This is a little technique in using the soul. This was a skill that Duque had learned when he was a Void Lord. The Undying had no five senses towards the outside world. Because of death, the five senses of the living would no longer transmit any response. The only thing they could rely on was their soul. Everything in the world had a soul. Even a rock that mortals thought was lifeless actually contained large amounts of bacteria and microorganisms. These organisms formed the body of a soul, and the soul undulations they emitted could still be sensed by the Undying. Thus, in the world of the Undying, only the color of the soul remained. What Duque did was to block the dissipation of his soul in that instant. Thus, in the perception of mortals, Duque didn't do anything. In fact, Duque had already vanished from Rivendel's sight for a while. In the end, Rivendell foolishly delivered his head to the rapidly thrusting, spiraling rapier's blade. Ah, that was the final scream of Rivendel's soul. It intensely stimulated the eardrums and souls of the spectators. Has Rivendel's soul been completely destroyed this time? Queen Sylvie asked. She still remembered that she had killed Rivendell once on the Isle of Quel's Donnas. Basically, Queen Sylvanas was curious. Duque sighed. The Scourge are the most troublesome. I can indeed destroy their souls with holy light. If their souls aren't complete before I destroy them, such as preserving or hiding a portion, they can still rely on the remaining souls to resurrect. Chapter 1272. Rivendell tortured and murdered the interracial newlyweds, granting them death and a pitiful life of servitude. However, at this time Thuzad played a beautiful diversion. He first let Naxxramas fly to Lordaeron. In fact, when the fortress flew over the hinterlands, he secretly dropped an elite group of Death Knights led by Rivendell. The most important fulcrum of this supply line was the strong fortress built in the southwest corner of Stratholme, the Northern Fortress. The predecessor of the Northern Fortress was the Northern Sentry Tower. Later, under the orders of Duque, the Alliance gathered a considerable amount of manpower and material resources to expand this sentry tower, forming a small fortress covering an area of 3,000 square meters with 5 towers in the east, west, south, north, and center. The portal opened. Tyrion carried Zeliek's head and Gavin Rad dragged the soulless remains of Blomo. The 15 members of the hero group finally gathered. The higher-ups of the Alliance ordered to shrink the line of defense. Unfortunately, the rebuilding of the Blood Elf Kingdom of Sindorii was equally shocking. It's all settled, Gavin Rad gasped softly. In fact, this was also a sin committed by Kel, Thuzad and Naxxramas a while ago. Duque sighed softly. In order to coordinate how to better protect the continuous flow of strategic supplies to the Kingdom of Sindorii, the two commanders constantly met in an abandoned village in the North Valley. As a result, the handsome Sir Zeliek fell in love with Miss Blomo. Similarly, the beautiful Miss Blomo was conquered by Sir Zeliek's charming temperament. The busybodies held a grand wedding for the two. People temporarily forgot about the terrible natural disaster, and a warm atmosphere reappeared in this sad land. The land of Lordaeron, which had been polluted by the plague of the natural disaster, showed signs of recovery. Tyrion was a very upright person and he also had something to say. When they stood opposite us as Death Knights, we should undoubtedly destroy them, but now, the representatives were Duchess Blomu of Sindorii and Sir Zeliek of Lordaeron. The former served as the commander of the Salas Sentry Tower, while the latter served as the commander of the Northern Sentry Tower. Both of them were the core figures of the Scourge Defense Force. In fact, Duque's willpower wasn't that strong, but Duque's soul was very tolerant. Most of them were the souls, moral integrity, of the famous saints, which was why the people called him Saint Duque. If the three of them did not mention it, Duque would not know anything about the background of these two horsemen of the apocalypse. From the moment he met Jaden, he was afraid of everything and didn't dare to take responsibility. That was why Dan was promoted. After that, he became the great chieftain, and because he was afraid of Kil'jaeden, he risked his life to attack Azeroth. In the end he was directly blown up by Duque. Duque's scalp went numb. Alright, let me try. That was how the second Lich King Arthas came into being. If he had put in some effort there would have only been one Lich King Nizul. If he didn't get tortured by Kill Jaden's soul for 8 to 10 years, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He lost himself a long time ago. If it's a soul fusion it will inevitably introduce the will of other souls. Even if it's a fusion with a blank baby's soul, it will dilute the concentration of the original soul. The strength of the soul affects a person's strength. If the fused soul is too weak the strength will be greatly reduced. If the fused soul is too strong he will lose himself or he won't even know which will belongs to him. It sounded like there was no end to this. The beautiful and dignified female elf was the first to speak. Her voice, which was like an oriole coming out of the valley, had a rare solemnity. Actually, Blamu and Zeliak are from the Silver Dawn. Because of Arthas' destruction of Lordaeron City and the Silver Moon City massacre, many survivors were in extreme pain and also extremely hostile to the Scourge. Duque smiled bitterly. Generally speaking, an independent soul is very exclusive. Basically, there is no real fusion between souls. It's like water and oil never mixing together. But the Scourge seems to have some kind of method to forcibly stitch different souls together. For example, when we first discovered that Kel Thuzad was a necromancer, we used holy light to purify his soul. It stands to reason that at least 80% of his soul should be gone. As a last resort, after some discussion, Kalia and Sylvanas decided to maintain the supply line from Stratholme to Long Song Forest. Kalia said, "Can we redeem their souls like we did with Thaddeus?" Duque deliberated for a moment and continued, "It's very difficult for the soul of a living creature to multiply. You can think of it this way. The lost soul can never be recovered. It will disappear forever along with some memories." In fact, there was another example, the Lich King Nizul and Arthas. On the surface, it was Nizul who had been tempting the fool to fall, dragging his soul into the abyss of despair. Unfortunately, Nizul was too soft. Queen Sylvanas' question felt like she was asking Duque his own question. From the beginning to the end, this guy was a guy who was afraid of death. Then why? Queen Sylvanas wanted to say something but stopped. While Duque's team was in a daze, the battle on the other two sides had also come to an end. They only needed to change their target once more before they were done. "At the start of the battle I could feel the struggle of their souls," Tyrion said. "Then what's going on with the other souls?" "You know what happened next." When Aurelia said this she could not help but feel sad. Resurrection? This word made Queen Sylvanas very unhappy. After hearing this, Duque was at first stunned. As a transmigrator and veteran player, unless it was a game mission that left a deep impression, no one would care about the historical background of each boss in a large dungeon with more than a dozen bosses. Seeing that they were hesitant to speak, Duque could only say, "What's wrong?" After listening to Tyrion's detailed explanation, Duque learned, "Duque?" Kalia crossed her fingers and made a standard prayer gesture. "Me too," Gavin Rad said. Now he had tempted Arthas to fuse with his soul, but who knew that his will was too weak? The result was that the great chief and first-generation Lich King's will was almost swallowed up without a trace left. The other fulcrum of the supply line was the Salas sentry tower at the border between Lordaeron and Sindorii. This sentry tower was guarded by an independent force that did not belong to either country, Silver Dawn. The problem was that President Ku drove the flying fortress everywhere to cause trouble, and the greatly strengthened main cities of the Alliance were not a big problem. However, due to the lack of mobility and low visibility at night, there were always remote areas affected. At this time Aurelia, Tyrion and Kalia came together. Chapter 1273. Divinity itself was not something that could be found on the street. Suitable divinity was even more difficult. If Duque did not happen to have the wind and thunder divinity of the Wind Prince, he would not have been able to transform Thaddeus. Now Duque did not have any extra divinity on hand. Then the so-called soul transformation was out of the question. However, complex transformation could not be done, but it did not mean that there was no way. Duque stretched out his hand, and with a special casting gesture, blue runes that emitted illusory light jumped out of his fingertips. Spirit Sealing Matrix. Strictly speaking, this did not belong to the category of mages. It should be said that it belonged to the domain of warlocks, demonic knowledge. Unlike Thaddeus, the pitiful Thaddeus was just an indifferent test subject. No one knew what would happen to him. Even if he became a Frankenstein-like existence, Thuzad only threw him into the abomination zone to guard the door. The Death Knights were definitely a different matter. The Death Knights and Liches, as the backbone of the Scourge Legion, were definitely mature troops that had been tempered. From killing designated targets, to using soul punishment to force their souls to fall, to brainwashing willpower, it could be said that the entire process was impeccable. However, the Lich King's mind control imprint was actually not that good. At least in the original history, when the Lich King Nazul left the Burning Legion, Sylvanas, who had become a death banshee, broke free from his control. In this life, it was the great Lich Anastrian who broke the shackles of mind control. Now the new Lich King Arthas was still asleep. Thuzad, the commander who directly controlled the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, was temporarily sealed by Duque in the different dimension at the core of the fortress. This was an opportunity. Put the remains of the 3 of them into the Matrix. Let go of the dwarf's independence and put Blamu and Zeliek together. The rest of the clerics, prepare to help me pour holy light into the Matrix. 3 paladins and 2 priests immediately stood nervously and orderly on the 5 corners of the pentagram matrix that Duque had condensed with magic. Who? Duque adjusted his breathing. He spread out his perception and spirit sense. External interference. Eliminated. The soul connection between the Lich King and Thuzad was cut off. Good. Get to work. Duque suddenly raised his head, his face slightly raised at a 30-degree angle. His righteous face was filled with a holy aura, and a golden radiance was faintly discernible on Duque's face. At some point, Duque's voice became ethereal. Even though Duque was right by her ear and his voice was endless, it sounded like a choir of children singing melodious hymns in a distant church. Perplexed soul. Can you see that on the other side of hell there is still a lighthouse of holy light? Tormented souls. Can you hear your friends and relatives in the mortal world still calling your name? The darkness will eventually pass just like the last darkness before dawn. Wake up. Come back. The call of your king. Duque waved his hand and the kings immediately understood. Magni swung his hammer and the materialized Balrog hammer smashed on the floor making a crisp sound. Kurtz, get back here. I don't want to tell your son that his dad ran off to become a lackey of the Scourge army when we're bragging in the tavern. Perhaps it was an illusion, but Lord Kurtaz's skull trembled. Sylvanas put her hands on her hips and said domineeringly, Blanc, have you forgotten our oath? We swore to take revenge on the Scourge. We swore to chase Arthas to the end of hell and now you've actually become a Death Knight? What do you look like? Get back here. Blamua's skeleton seemed to move. Kalia knelt down gently and made a praying gesture. Holy light bloomed on her pure face full of love. Sir Zeli, you've done very well. But I sincerely believe that this shouldn't be the end of a warrior fighting against the Scourge. Come back, I will pray for you. Following the call of the 3 kings, the souls of the 3 Death Knights seemed to respond. No, it's not enough. Benedictus, who had helped countless souls and had rich experience, gritted his teeth. The redemption of the soul is not that simple. The powerful will of the Lich King poured into their souls. Their willpower is not enough, so they need a stronger stimulus. A stronger stimulus? Where could a stronger stimulus come from? Theon clenched his fists, but he suddenly sighed secretly. Yes, not everyone's name was Uther. Not every soul had such a strong will to resist the soul torture and corrosion of Frostmourne. Leave it to me, Duque suddenly said. Every fallen soul often had not only the surrender of the will, but also the pollution of the heart. For example, even if Arthas became a Death Knight, Mal, Gannis and Thuzad at the time, they all faintly forced the fool to do things that he felt would make him more sinful, making him even more self-deprecating. Even if these 3 guys had not become Death Knights for a long time as far as Duque knew, at least Thuzad had let them participate in the siege of Old Mograine and several massacres against civilians. Therefore a simple call was not enough. Duque had the system elf, so it was naturally more possible. Using the soul techniques learned from the Burning Legion, Duque was able to read a considerable number of fragmented soul fragments from the souls of the 3 Death Knights. This was not something that was made up out of nothing. These were all things that had really happened to the three of them. It was just that Duke who had picked them out and completed them. In an instant, illusory projection fragments appeared above the magic circle. It was a heroic fragment of Kurtaz rampaging around on the battlefield and killing his brothers in the tavern. It was a fragment of Blamu and Zeliek's tryst in the small grain field. Although this involved privacy, the souls of the three soon reacted. A series of metal cracking sounds came from the void, as if chains or something were disintegrating inch by inch. In the middle of the soul magic circle created by Duque, the Alliance powerhouses were pleasantly surprised to find that 3 silver souls rose from the remains of the 3 Death Knights like balloons. Soon the souls had 4 limbs, a head, eyes, ears, a mouth and a nose. Finally, even the patterns on the armor they wore were clearly visible. That's right, they were officially Blamu, Zeliek and Kurtaz. The faces of the 3 of them were filled with shame. Kurtaz first knelt on one knee in front of Magni and said with his head lowered in remorse, "Sorry, it seems that I can't drink with your majesty in the future." Chapter 1274. On the other side, Blamua's soul was nestled in the arms of Zeliek's soul. The 2 of them seemed to be cowering a little. It was Zeliek who spoke first. "Sorry, your majesty Kalia, I screwed up." "It's not your fault." There were tears in the corners of Kalia's eyes. She used her slender fingers to gently wipe away the tears, and then revealed a smile that still looked like she was crying. "It's because we're too backward. If we could also master the technique of flying in the air earlier, then we wouldn't have to be beaten up like you guys. If anyone is at fault, it should be me as the queen who is the first to be at fault." Taking the initiative to take responsibility in this era of showing royal power and informing the people with an unbreakable hierarchy sounded more like a fantasy. For a moment the couple was stunned. Queen Sylvie also came up. "Blamu, you did a good job. If you hadn't helped guard the Salis Trail for so long, perhaps the people of New Silvermoon would have starved. But I still owe you a wedding gift." Aurelia stepped forward. She didn't know if she could hug a soul. She looked at Duque and saw Duque smiling and nodding. Then she hugged him directly. The feeling of being hugged by a living being, which was like a corporeal spiritual body, was incomparably mysterious and strange. After a moment of shock, tears of the soul fell from the corners of Blamua's eyes. The sighs and greetings lasted for a full 5 minutes. Then all the existences turned their eyes to Duque. The question was this considered redemption? Duque cleared his throat. In fact, in this world, souls can stay in the mortal world forever. Perhaps in the form of a vengeful spirit or a heroic spirit. Heroic spirit. This word made all the living people's hearts palpitate. The dead were already gone. Crossing the boundary between life and death was not accepted by the mainstream view. For example, the forgotten, then becoming a heroic spirit was the best choice. Heroic spirit. It is not unrestrained. Heroic spirits are similar to vengeful spirits. They also need a cornerstone-like attachment. In my opinion, the best choice for the 3 of you is to become the guardian spirit of this flying fortress that is about to be occupied by the Alliance, Naxxramas. Guardian spirit? The 3 souls became excited at the same time. It was as if their hearts, which had stopped beating a long time ago, were jumping with joy at this moment. With just a few words from Duque, the 3 souls suddenly found the meaning of continuing to exist in this world. As the former leaders of Naxxramas, of course they knew how powerful this flying fortress was. It was as if they could already see the gigantic fortress guarding the cursed land, resonating with the watchtower from top to bottom, forming a terrifying 3-dimensional defense system. No matter how many terrifying demons poured out of the dark portal, they would only die in front of this terrifying defensive formation that resembled the Wall of Sighs. "We are willing," the 3 souls said in unison. Duque nodded and turned to everyone. "All right, let's get ready for the final battle. As long as we take care of Kel, Thazad and Saffron, this great floating fortress will become the guardian of the Alliance and even the entire Azeroth." While Duque was cleaning up Naxxramas, fierce battles also broke out in various parts of Silithus. In the Temple of Ankh-Karaj, the Scourge army that had been thrown down by Duque was making a final struggle. They guarded every corner of the temple ruins, and even the more powerful high-grade Death Knights tried to gather their companions and break out. In the Cenarian fortress in the north of Silithus, facing the insects that rushed out of the Pillar of Swarm, the Alliance directly used a terrifying barrage to deal with the overwhelming insects. Don't think about it, fire all the 3-style bombs. For this day, Lord Marcus has prepared at least 500,000 3-style bombs. Don't worry about the cannonballs. Worry about whether you have the life to fire all the cannonballs first. The Alliance's artillery commanders loudly scolded the artillerymen below. Duque had guided the Iron Furnace Fort to improve the technology for 20 years, and now the cannon produced by the Iron Furnace Fort rarely exploded. The production line, coupled with the strict limit on the number of times the cannon could be fired, almost eliminated the incidence of casualties caused by the artillery exploding. And the 3-style bombs 3, which could split into hundreds of small metal warheads in the air, were in a sense not the old-fashioned shotgun, but something close to a cluster bomb. The shotgun directly exploded in the cannon chamber, which was extremely damaging to the cannon barrel. The latest Type 3-style bombs used a 2-stage delayed ignition and detonation system. Only when the cannonball flew out of the cannon barrel for about 2 seconds would the second stage be ignited, detonating the small warheads in the cannonball and exploding. At first glance, it was even more dazzling than fireworks. The shotgun, whose purpose was to kill in an area, was, of course, useless against the thick-skinned big guys like the Heaven Breaker. But for the relatively slender, large-sized flying insects that did not have real hard armor, it was simply a nightmare. As long as a stray bullet or even a single piece grazed a limb, there would immediately be a hole slightly larger than the mouth of a bull. Flesh and blood, limbs flying everywhere, all of these were not enough to describe the savagery of the Type 3-style bombs. That scene, it was as if after one shot in a sphere with a diameter of 100 meters, not even a blade of grass would grow. All the flying insects would explode, turning into scattered limbs and parts that fell from the sky like rain. After a round of artillery fire, what fell from the sky was not just hundreds, but thousands of insects. In order to avoid accidental damage or even accidental killing by artillery fire, the coalition forces did not send out air forces. At a distance of 200 to 500 meters, it was within the range of the Cenarian Circle's Treants, as well as the coalition's temporary military magic tower and elven archers. Closer there were dwarven gunners, humans and troll spear throwers to deal with them. On land, the swarming insects could be said to be overwhelming. Unfortunately, in front of the continuous array of cannons, it was more like sending food. Ground attacks were not as complicated as air attacks. The dwarves and gnome cannoneers could pull out their large-caliber heavy cannons at will. For long-range attacks there were new cannons. For closer attacks there were new, small steel cannons and dwarven mortars. Slightly closer there were steam tanks and fire-breathing tanks blocking in front of them. This scene made Sal's eyelids twitch and he could not help but think to himself, if the tribes were to fight, I really don't know how many tribal warriors would have to be sacrificed to win. The impact of this three-dimensional war concept made Sal's mouth full of bitterness. 21 years ago his ancestors used muscle and barbaric weapons to conquer almost half of the Alliance. 21 years later, although he had worked hard to catch up and had stolen a large number of things from the goblins that were black technology for the orcs, he was shocked to find that the gap between the tribes and the Alliance had not only not narrowed, but had even widened. If there were no such things as magic, the Alliance could flatten the entire tribe with artillery alone. Orcs, trolls and taurens could not even find a place to stay in front of the Alliance. Just as Sal's thoughts were a little scattered, an accident happened on the battlefield. Chapter 1275. It was a huge beetle-shaped bug. From afar it looked like a small mountain. Just its bulging back was 5 stories high. This guy used its thick and solid carapace to block all the dwarves' artillery fire and rushed over. 3 dwarf Spitfire tanks bravely went up to meet it. Unfortunately, with a pinch of its huge mouth, one of the Spitfire tanks exploded on the spot, bursting into a small mushroom cloud of flames. The remaining 2 tanks were not spared either. The giant bug used its horns to dig and flip the 2 tanks upside down, and then there was a violent explosion. Krasis frowned deeply. In the absence of the Alliance's commanders as well as the group of kings, he was the temporary commander of the Alliance Expeditionary Force. He could not bear to watch this scene. However, this kind of existence that exceeded conventional force had to be dealt with by someone strong. However, before he could speak, Sal had already taken a step forward and said in a clear voice, "The Alliance has done enough for this world. Leave this to the tribe's experts. There was no need for Sal to give another order. Rexer had already stepped out. Misha, Rexer, who had ogre blood and infinite strength, made an extremely shocking move. He threw out his pet war bear Misha, which weighed at least a ton. Yes, that's right, he threw it out. It was like a dwarf artillery soldier who had activated Deity Descends and picked up a 1-ton mortar shell. However, Lexer was even more relaxed and satisfied. He had tossed away such a big bear just like that. Damn, it even had a spiraling effect. The experienced dwarf artillery soldier could not help but wonder if this Misha also had an armor-piercing or a second explosion function. It was obvious that the old dwarf was thinking too much. Rexer's Misha was very precious. He was not someone who shouted, "Explosions are art," all day long, nor was he a necromancer who lost his mind. How could he let his precious war pet do the work of self-destructing? But throwing out a 1-ton giant bear just like that weight was indeed lethal. The big worm was dumbfounded by Misha's attack. With Rexer's command, Misha immediately entered a berserk state. Not only was his body suffused with a scarlet bloodlight, but his body also became a full size bigger. He actually managed to slap that incomparably large bug away with a single palm strike. Following that, Misha roared and pounced forward, his 2 large bare paws striking out continuously. With the shrill cries of the insects as the background music, almost every slap from Misha sent large pieces of the insect's carapace and flesh flying. Seeing this scene, Krasis could not help but nod and ask Sal, "Is this the legendary Beastmaster Hunter?" Not bad. Sal couldn't help but feel proud. The Beastmen had migrated to Kalimdor. Apart from not being able to catch up to the Alliance in terms of technology, they had also gained something. For example, in terms of the hunter profession, under the leadership of Lexer and the other hunters, they had developed talents such as Beastmaster Hunter. In terms of the research of professional skills, they had the potential to surpass the Alliance. Unfortunately, there were still too few professionals. The Alliance's artillery fire was still fierce, but no matter how strong the artillery fire was, it was impossible to shoot down all the invading insects. For a small number of insects that had rushed to the front of the formation, it was a bit of a waste to use the Alliance's battle formation to defend. For the Alliance soldiers, wearing full body armor itself required physical strength. Looking at the endless stream of insects, Krasis discussed with Sal and decided that the tribal warriors would go out into the formation to kill the isolated insects, while the Alliance's elven archers and priests would provide support from the back. Occasionally, powerful insects would break in, and naturally there would be Master Howl, Kane, and other strong warriors to deal with them. The battle lasted for more than 24 hours. Fortunately, the Alliance's military strength was strong, and they used a rotating system, so it was not impossible for them to hold on. At this time, there was a sudden rumble of cannons in the distance. They saw 3 huge flying battleships, sweeping away the clouds and slowly descending from a high altitude where the flying insects could not reach. As they descended, they opened all the cannons exaggeratedly, using the height and parabola to clear the insect colony further away that the heavy cannons of the stronghold could not hit. Almost every cannonball that fell would set off a column of smoke more than 10 meters high. Sand and insect limbs flew everywhere, and the scene was spectacular. The great and invincible figure, the dense and terrible cannons on the side of the ship, and the Alliance flag fluttering in the wind, all stimulated the eyes of the tribal warriors. Whether it was the Alliance or the tribe, all the warriors let out a deafening cheer. Sal's face was a little blue. Fortunately, his face was green, so the Alliance did not look obvious, but Wajin immediately noticed it. Without Sal's command, Wajin turned his hand and grabbed the collar of the goblin boss who joined the tribe, the Prince of Trade, Garavix, the owner of the Rustwater conglomerate. The wise Wajin spoke in the goblin language that very few people could understand. "Do you see that thing in the sky? If we don't want our main city to be threatened by that thing's cannons in the future, the tribe must also have its own flying battleship." It was easier said than done to build a flying battleship of the level of the Heavenbreaker. Looking at the extremely exaggerated design of the 8 propellers, Garavix could feel the technical barriers contained in it. He thought of the sad days when he was threatened by the Alliance with cannons, and was threatened by King Delin that if he did not pay taxes he would not be able to do business. The goblin boss fiercely clenched his teeth. The tribe will have a flying battleship. How long? 3 years. If we can steal the blueprint, it will be a year at most. Duque did not know the dirty thoughts of the several leaders of the tribe. At this moment, in Naxxramas, Duque was chatting with the people around him while dividing the spoils. Well, as long as there are no accidents, Naxxramas will belong to our alliance. As long as we get on courage, we can form a joint flying fleet of the alliance and the tribe. Joint flying fleet? Where did the tribe get a flying ship? Alusia was curious. Technical output, of course, Duque replied casually. Magni was annoyed. Hey, Duque, although you came up with the idea, the research and practice are all done by us dwarves and gnomes. If you say technical output, then so be it. You should also consider our feelings. Duque chuckled. What are you so nervous about, old man? When have I ever let the dwarves, gnomes, and even the alliance suffer losses? I didn't ask you to give the latest Heavenbreaker blueprint to the tribe. Can't you give the tribe some early-stage flying ship blueprints with single-cylinder and twin propellers? If you don't give the new cannons, you can at least give the outdated stuff without rifling. Think about it, if you sell all those dust-eating things in your warehouse, that would be money in ores. Speaking of this, Magni's eyes instantly lit up. When it comes to doing business, you humans are still the most cunning. But I like it. The two bad guys high-fived each other and then laughed evilly. Chapter 1276. With the three original horsemen of the apocalypse leading the way, the treasure chests of the four horsemen were not difficult to find. When everyone opened the treasure chests, not to mention the others, even Duque himself was stunned. First of all, a mere group of the four horsemen of the apocalypse would never have so many items. Duque glanced around and found that the equipment that should have been dropped by the bosses that died due to the Dalajan main cannon bombardment and various other reasons were all here. Seeing the doubts of Duque and the others, Blamu took the initiative to explain. Most of the chests are equipment that the Scourge army has plundered from all over the world. But the real best items are the Titan-era equipment that has long been in the fortress and has only recently been unearthed. The heroic spirit that was emitting a holy radiance reached into the chest and pulled out a few pieces of equipment. Almost as soon as he saw these pieces of equipment, Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. Sure enough, he was not mistaken. This was the second key to this batch of equipment. Quality. After killing Rivendell, the head of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Duque had obtained a small portion of divinity. The problem was that this divinity was filled with the power of chaos. In a situation where Duque could not produce divinity himself, forcefully using this divinity would only contaminate other divinity and even cause Duque to go insane. This was definitely not worth it. Duque dispersed this chaotic divinity and let it dissipate into the world. However, Duque did not expect that even if it was a portion of divinity that could not be used, because Rivendell had used it for a long time, it had inadvertently increased the quality of the equipment dropped. Lost Victor set, Lost Defender set, and Lost Conqueror set. These were level 80 sets of equipment that completely surpassed Mount Hyjal's level. It was also commonly known as the 7th set T7 by the players. Except for the head parts of the various sets that were still in Kel'Thuzad's hands, the gloves should be outside the Obsidian Temple. If it were not for the fact that there were too few sets, only 5, the entire team would have changed their equipment. After some discussion, it was decided that Magni, Tyrion, Gavinrad, Servanas, and Jaina would wear it first. Jaina was a little hesitant. After all, they were both mages, and this gorgeous Frostfire set was a greater bonus for Duque. Duque, do you really not want it? Duque shook his head. Putting aside the fact that he should be able to get the head of the suit, just the fact that the Obsidian Temple could not travel through time and space was enough to give Duque a headache. Of course, he couldn't say it out loud. Duque smiled and said, "Silly girl, why are you worried about me? I have a better." Duque stretched out his hand and grasped the air. A mysterious and heaven-defying aura suddenly spread out. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Duque. Ashes to ashes. Dust to dust. I, Duke Marcus, in the name of the successor of interstellar wanderer Medivh, in the name of the new guardian of Azeroth, summon your response. Come out. Atish. It was accompanied by a brief and mysterious call. Dozens of orange wooden fragments flew out of Duque's spatial bag and the horseman's treasure chest, like a jigsaw puzzle or a pile of building blocks. The incomplete fragments assembled themselves in the air. Pawa pawa. It was the strange sound of wood colliding with each other. Under everyone's watchful eyes, A dark brown staff with a long handle was completed. Then there was a soft orange glow. It was incredible. There was no longer a single crack on the staff's handle, which should have been covered in cracks. It was as if it was brand new. Duque took out a staff head that looked like a chicken drumstick and attached it to the staff. Without glue or any binding or repair, the staff head and body automatically fused together perfectly. This is... Jaina murmured in disbelief. Duque scratched his head. Sure enough, the staff's tail is still missing. As soon as Duque said that, everyone suddenly realized that there was a gap at the end of the staff that looked like it had been bitten by a dog. Indeed, the staff's tail was missing. Originally, everyone was wondering if they could see the birth of a divine artifact, but who knew that the staff's tail was still missing? Everyone congratulated Duque, but it seemed like they would feel bad if they didn't say anything. Only Duque himself didn't care. According to the original history, the divine artifact staff, Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian, would shatter into 42 pieces after killing Sardras. They were the head, the staff's tail, and the 40 pieces of the staff's body. Because of the existence of a certain transmigrator, the head of Atish's staff had been in Duque's hands from beginning to end. Now that he had unexpectedly obtained the staff's body in advance, it could be said that this divine artifact staff was more than half complete. But the last one was the most difficult because in history, the staff's tail should have been in Si Thun's hands. But when Duque held the staff in one hand, he felt a change in the pulse of fate. It's actually not in Si Thun's hands? There was a reaction between the various parts of the divine artifact. At this moment, Atish clearly told his new master that his final staff's tail wasn't in on Karaj but here. That's right. It was in Kel Thizad's hands. This is really lucky. Duque was very happy, very happy. He even couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ah! Hearty laughter resounded throughout the hall. What's wrong? Jaina secretly pulled on Duque's sleeve. Nothing. I just didn't expect that the last part of the divine artifact Atish would actually be in Kel Thizad's hands. Duque laughed very happily and also very presumptuous. Because as long as he killed Chairman Ku, then Duque could take the staff, it really was a divine artifact staff, and openly go against Si Thun, this ungrateful ancient god. How could Duque not be happy? In his joy, Duque even pulled Jaina over and gave her a kiss in front of everyone. A group of B***stars shouted. Even an honest person like Theon had a you-know look on his face. It was one thing for Duque to have an affair with a few queens, but it was another thing to actually kiss her in front of everyone. One had to know that Duque first had an engagement with Jaina, then cancelled it, and then maintained an ambiguous relationship between master and disciple. Now his behavior was really laughable. Jaina was so embarrassed that she just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Duque also realized that he had lost his composure. Facing Queen Sylvie's, "Kiss me in front of my face if you have the guts" gaze, Duque decisively shrunk back. Sure enough, some things couldn't be done in front of everyone. Otherwise, the people below wouldn't be able to pretend to be ignorant. Once the war stopped, they would definitely bring a large army to force a marriage. The gentleman Duque immediately put away his smiling face and put on a businesslike look. Ahem. Next, we have to prepare for the crusade against Kel Thizad. Chapter 1277. If Kel Thizad was a brute, Duque wouldn't have minded giving him the cold shoulder. It would have exhausted his patience and also his drive. Unfortunately, Kel Thizad wasn't. Even though he had lost most of his soul and had fused with an unknown soul, Duque's system elf scan concluded that Kel Thizad was still very strong. This feeling, from the moment Duke opened the portal to the other dimension inside Naxxramas, became more and more clear. During the time he was trapped, Kel Thizad must have done something. If Kel Thizad was a book that could be read thoroughly, then Duque might have lost interest in him. For such an intelligent and unique undead evil scientist, Duque always felt that Kel Thizad would bring him surprises. The unknown would make people afraid. But the unknown would also bring a sense of freshness and challenge. If everyone knew, then it was just harvesting for the sake of accumulating equipment. Unfortunately, harvesting would never be as exciting as exploring. Worried that the heroic spirits would be affected by Kel Thizad again, it was still a 15-man team of heroes that entered the other dimension, along with a temporary humanoid mount. As soon as they came out of the portal, everyone felt the strange cold air. Woo! It's so cold. Kalia shivered. She was already in such a state even though she was wearing a thick priest robe. The 3 female ranger heroes who were wearing 3-point armor were even more unbearable. There was no need for anyone to remind them. A group of people who were afraid of the cold immediately moved closer to Duque. Especially the 7 who were close to Duque, they instantly moved to the center position closest to Duque. Well, except for a certain mount that stood proudly to the side. Damn, you used me as a fridge in the molten core and now you're using me as a heater? You're really treating me like a variable frequency air conditioner. Duque complained as he opened the lava armor. This lava armor of a normal mage increased the mage's critical hit rate, and when someone dared to attack a mage in close combat, the magma would splash out and hit the attacker's face, achieving a damage reflection effect. As a Breaking Dawn archmage, Duque's modification of ordinary magic had long since reached a level that could shock the heavens and make the gods weep. It wasn't wrong to say that it was a variable frequency air conditioner. The system notifications kept ringing. Import theoretical knowledge of air conditioning. Start calculating entropy. Fluid mechanics introduction. Importing air circulation and thermodynamic circulation formulas. With the help of the system, Duque quickly adjusted his mana output. Not only did he let the heat of the lava armor spread out evenly, but he also expanded the heat range of the lava armor and condensed a wide area ice shield. Except this time, it was a wide area heating shield. The Iron Furnace Castle was surrounded by mountains that were covered in snow all year round, but Magna had to come here to freeload off the heat. This guy even laughed and patted Duque's thigh. Yo. Not bad. I used to look down on you people who played magic. It's great to be an air conditioner now. Whoever marries you will be blessed. It's warm in winter and cool in summer. Who? You want me, a Breaking Dawn archmage, to change my profession to be an air conditioner? Do you believe that I won't freeze your D***CK forever? Although he was complaining in his heart, Duque was surrounded by the girls and couldn't say anything. He just glared at the bastard dwarf king. The portal led them to a magnificent palace. Of course, this had nothing to do with Chairman Ku and Saffron, because this palace was a titan creation that Naxxramas had left behind. The frost dragon was too huge and Saffron, who had lost his ultimate transformation ability, could only build his nest outside. Under the cover of Duque's wide area heating shield, everyone started to walk out of the palace. Duque frowned. He didn't feel it at first, but now that he was closer he could clearly feel the divinity contained in the cold air, frost divinity. Bloody hell, Arthas is really willing to invest so much money into this. Just as they walked out of the palace, a cold and evil voice came from above. Hee. Finally willing to come in? Despicable thieves who want to steal the fortress of the great Lich King. Bolsh**. Didn't the Calamity Army steal the floating fortress from the Titans? Originally, Duque wanted to retort like this. The scene before them left Duque and the others speechless. What did they see? A bone dragon knight? Or a dragon lich and a bone dragon? Duque and the others didn't know what the hell this was. What appeared in front of everyone was the frost dragon Saffron. That was if they didn't count Kel, Thuzad on its neck. Dragons, as the top creature of the Azeroth food chain, were almost invincible. Its entire body could be seen 360 degrees without any blind spots. What? You said it exposed its belly? Firstly, their bellies had the same thick scales and dragon's skin. Second, if 4 dragon claws scratched you, would you be afraid? Also, the dragon's neck could turn at almost any angle, and could cover almost all parts of its back except for one, the place where the dragon's neck and body met. So, Onyxia, who was willing to be bitten by Duque in that place, symbolized her complete submission. Now there was an additional Kel, Thuzad in that place. His entire lower body had fused with Saffron's neck, and it looked like a piece of white bone. This scene immediately gave Duque a headache. Previously, Duque was confident that he could take down Kel, Thuzad and Saffron because Saffron basically lost his intelligence after death, leaving only the instincts of the dragon race. So, a bone dragon was a bone dragon and a lich was a lich. As long as Onyxia could viciously entangle Saffron, then Duque and the hero group could focus all their strength on killing Kel Thuzad. At this moment, the most terrifying thing happened. The lich, who was relatively weak in close combat, had the most powerful body. The relatively weak bone dragon had a brain that could be used as a core. Duque didn't know if this combination was as perfect as he imagined it to be. If it was as he imagined, no, even if it was only 70%, it would be a nightmare for the Alliance. Kel Thuzad was very satisfied with the expressions of the Alliance powerhouses. He waved his 2 huge claws that only had 4 fingers, and his dry jaw kept opening and closing, making a sinister sound. Oh, it seems that our uninvited guest is very surprised. It's no wonder. I don't know which despicable traitor sold out the information about Naxxramas, but I can guarantee that this change was not in the information provided by the traitor. Because until the moment before you controlled Naxxramas, I didn't decide to do this. Duque's muscles trembled slightly. Kel Thuzad continued to grin. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you, Duke Marcus. Chapter 1278. Thank me? This time Duque was dumbfounded. Sure enough, Kel Thuzad couldn't wait to reveal the answer. If you hadn't betrayed me and corrected me, I wouldn't have been suppressed by Antonidas, and I wouldn't have been tortured by the holy light. Most of my soul would have been destroyed, and all that's left is pure resentment and hatred. And my soul from the giant dragon. Duque was speechless. Was this a blessing in disguise, or was it a death wish without limits? No wonder Kel seemed to be stronger than in history. It turned out that Nazul had such a heavy taste that he actually gave him a part of the giant dragon's soul. So with less than 20% resentment and hatred and pure evil thoughts, Kel assimilated the scattered giant dragon's soul? Was it Saffron's soul? Or was it another giant frost dragon's soul? This was really unimaginable. Back then Duque made a small report and tricked Kel's soul. He never forgot about it and even diluted and fused his own soul just to take revenge. Cough cough. Forget it, I think you should just die early. Of course, sanctimonious hypocrite. Oh no, righteous, honest and reliable. Duque waved his hand. Transmigrators don't lie. If I say I'll destroy your whole family, then I'll destroy your whole family. That's right, there's nothing wrong with it. Suddenly, a huge flame was released from under Duque's feet. At first glance, Duque seemed to have been swallowed by the flame, but as long as one ignored the sputtering fire elements, one could see that Duque was actually being lifted up by a huge pillar of fire. Then a second pillar, a third pillar. The whole group of platforms formed a mountain shape with the middle high and the 2 sides low. Every Alliance powerhouse was gently pushed to the front of the platform. The platform got higher and higher, and the highest platform that was carrying Duque was instantly more than 10 stories high. Kel Thuzad, who was originally sitting on the back of the giant frost dragon and looking down at Duque, was now being looked down at by Duque, who was in a higher position. Duque sat in the air, and a throne made entirely of flames automatically appeared behind him. At the top of the throne was the head of Ragnaros's 2-horned Balrog. The left and right corners of the throne were sharp flame spikes that looked like the heads of a meteor hammer. The second hand of the throne was a pair of giant claws that Duque's hands rested on. The flames that should have burned the human body to ashes seemed to have turned into a soft and comfortable sofa. When Duque sat on it, he would not be burned, nor would he feel any discomfort. After taking away the divinity of Ragnaros, Duque finally displayed his unparalleled flame manipulation talent to the world today. He deliberately raised his chin by a full 60 degrees, and his sonorous and forceful voice resounded throughout the entire venue. Kel Thuzad, you have violated the laws of heaven, the laws of earth, and the laws of man, challenging the boundaries of life and death with the greatest malice, crossing the uncrossable taboo line. People like you are the enemy of the world. I can save noble souls and even depraved souls, I can redeem them. But only you, Kel Thuzad, the only fate that awaits you is destruction, eternal destruction. From ancient times to the present, flames had been endowed with many meanings by various intelligent races. It was light. It was heat. It was even a myth. But whether it was the living or the dead in their memories, the greatest role of flames had always been destruction. How many living beings were destroyed and how many undead were purified? Perhaps the cause was just a fire seed from a tree that was struck by lightning or a simple torch. The fire that Duque controlled at this time could not help but remind Kel Thuzad of the flamethrowers that could be found all over the cities and towns of the Alliance. Almost every small village had one. Even two farmers who had received simple training could easily turn a company of zombies and skeleton soldiers into nothingness. Duque's arrogant expression at this moment reminded Kel Thuzad of the terrifying years when the Dalajan was exposed and he was labeled as a taboo, despised, humiliated, and executed. Suddenly, the anger that had been sealed away for a long time dominated Kel Thuzad's soul. He was furious. Marcus, you will pay for your arrogance. You will pay the most tragic price for everything you have done. I've changed my mind. Before I send your arrogant and ridiculous soul to His Majesty the Lich King, I will first thoroughly torture you. Kel'Thuzad screamed. The frost dragon Saffron, who clearly felt its master's emotions, also opened its white and bloodless jaws. Roar! It was a terrifying dragon's roar that came from the soul. The experts of the Alliance felt a chill in their hearts at the same time. Duque had a proud smile on his face. He stood up from the blazing flame throne, stretched out his right hand, hooked his index finger and said with incomparable contempt, "Come." Kel'Thuzad only felt that his frozen soul was suddenly ignited by the flames of anger. Without his command, the frost dragon under him had already roared and rolled up a terrifying ice tornado, pouncing towards Duque on the blazing flame throne. No one noticed that Xianxia had taken a deep breath after the blazing flame monarch had left. It wasn't until the black dragon's huge head revealed a cruel smile that came out from the blazing pillar of fire that Kel'Thuzad realized that he had fallen into Duque's trap again. Xianxia's famous big move. Deep breath. The dragon's breath that was spat out was like a cone-shaped cloud of fire. The turbulence brought with it a dark red light that was both Xianxia's divinity and Duque's divinity. Blazing and berserk dragon breath gushed out, easily turning this originally white world into a sea of fire. The sky was burning, the earth was burning, and the air was filled with the crackling sound of the flowing flames. The ice and fire tornadoes created by the two dragons collided in midair. At that moment, the entire space seemed to flash with the unique brilliance of elemental lines. The laws of space seemed to have been completely rewritten in an instant. Half of the space was densely packed with crimson flame patterns, as if these flame patterns could immediately turn this place into a second molten core. Half of the white space flashed with layers of overlapping silver networks, as if it wanted to pull all living beings into the eternal ice and snow of no scent, dispersing all heat and stopping all life. Two completely different scenes completely enveloped the entire Frost Dragon's palace and spread in all directions. With the power of the two dragons as the center, it was as if there was a moment of delay before a shockwave swept across the entire space. At that moment, the gorgeous palace seemed to have suffered a terrible earthquake. The gorgeous tiles under their feet could not withstand the damage brought by the turbulent flow of elemental elements and were lifted up one after another. However, before they could splash out and cause harm to the people around them, they had already turned into powder in the aftermath of the devastating power. Chapter 1279. This power. Kalia was tongue-tied. Even people like Kalia who were close to Duque were shocked by Duque's power, let alone people like Benedettas who were not in the mainstream circle. Unknowingly, Duque's power had already transcended the mortal world. Duque had always thought that he had not transcended the realm of mortals. In the eyes of others, Duque was riding on the once incomparably evil black dragon, using the surging flames of divinity to suppress the darkest icy wind. This kind of scene was undoubtedly spectacular in the domain of the gods. Magni transformed, and in his burly mountain king form he stood at the front of the team. Two of the 5 silver saints, Theon and Gavin Rad, shone with golden light as they stood at the 2 wings. The 3 of them formed the most solid vanguard formation, like a triangular shield, firmly blocking the front of the elemental turbulence. Later, Jaina summoned an arcane shield and gently wrapped the remaining alliance powerhouses within it. Everyone looked at the 2 groups of opponents fighting in midair with an expression that was close to worship. At first glance, the 2 sides seemed to be evenly matched. Soon everyone realized the difference. Saffron was definitely powerful when he was alive. In terms of status, he was second only to the Blue Dragon Queen Syndagosa. However, after he died, he became a frost dragon with a bone dragon foundation. All that was left of him was his battle instincts. Originally, Xianxia was definitely stronger than Saffron. Unfortunately, after any dragon was seriously injured, their recovery speed was not that fast. Right now she was only at about 60% of her strength. There shouldn't have been much of a difference. The difference was in the master. Thuzad had obviously just injected the frost divinity into his body. His use of this power that was beyond his imagination was far inferior to Duque, who had the help of the system and was familiar with training for a longer period of time. It seemed to be a pure elemental contest without any fancy tricks. Under Duque's guidance, Onyxia deliberately turned the dragon's breath, which had been strengthened by Duque's divine power, into a spiral cone shape. As a result, after a moment of stalemate, the winner of this massive battle in the air was decided in a few seconds. Onyxia's dragon breath easily dispersed Saffron's icy wind, and the remaining flames struck Saffron's left bony wing, exploding into sparks. The elemental erosion directly affected the soul level, and the frost dragon immediately howled in pain. Even the red dragon queen Alexstrasza had to take a breather after unleashing her most powerful dragon breath. For the giant dragon, the next battle would be hand-to-hand combat. In terms of body size, Onyxia did not have an advantage. But that depended on who he was compared to. If they were both living dragons, the older they were, the more powerful they were, the more experience they had, and the more strength and agility they had. The problem was that one was a bone dragon that had been dead for many years and only had its bones and soul left, while the other was a semi-god-level giant dragon that was alive and kicking. Its complete muscles and tendons gave it strength and speed bonuses that were not something a bone dragon could compare to. On top of that, there was a sinister, a scheming master around. Use Vine to slow him down. Get a stream of fire to distract his frost shield and counterattack. On the dragon's back, Duque and Thuzad bombarded each other with spells. All kinds of elemental spells went back and forth and they were having a lot of fun. But on the giant dragon level, it was obvious that the black dragon princess was suppressing Saffron. The advantage in speed and the lack of tendons and muscles severely affected Saffron's speed. After receiving consecutive heavy blows, Onyxia used Dragon Claw Sweep and Dragon Wing Slap combo. Saffron finally could not hold on any longer, and his movements clearly slowed down for a moment. The black dragon, who was slightly smaller in size, seized the opportunity and suddenly crouched to avoid Saffron's counterattack. Almost rolling on the ground, it whipped its tail and hit Saffron's waist heavily with its gigantic meteor hammer-like tail. The spectators could clearly see that at least 2 of Saffron's ribs on the right side were broken, and 5 or 6 ribs had cracks. Saffron let out another soul wail. He used all his strength to swing his bone dragon tail, trying to counterattack and severely injure Onyxia, who knew that the black dragon would suddenly climb up and fly even higher. When Duque's flame blast almost hit the Great Lich's face, Onyxia saw the opportunity and extended her dragon neck, giving Saffron's left chest a moderate amount of dragon breath. The blazing dragon breath directly hit the frost aura floating in the ice dragon's chest. That was actually the frost dragon's heart, but that frost aura could not be attacked by physical means. The frost dragon, who was covered in wounds, fell from the sky with Thuzad. He crashed to the ground with a loud crash. His enormous body instantly smashed open a huge crater that was at least 5 meters deep and had a radius of several hundred meters sunk in. At that moment, it was as if the entire area let out a cry of pain. The sunken ground layer by layer spread in all directions, and the magnificent palace not far away also collapsed. Thuzad, who had his upper and lower jaws like a rake, was in a sorry state. Finally, he cried out weakly, "Protect me." Suddenly, the surroundings became blurry as if there was a thin layer of ice fog covering the distance, making it difficult to see clearly. Countless skeleton soldiers, death knights, liches, gargoyles, and abominations rushed out from the ice fog, trying to protect their master. Unfortunately, in just one move, a golden holy flame had completely submerged them. Thuzad's red soulfire eyes looked blankly at his subordinates being destroyed by the paladins in front of him. The abominations shed their skin in the holy light, revealing burning muscles, bones, and internal organs. They then turned into ashes and dissipated into the air. Thuzad was stunned for a moment. Damn. The pressure that Duque gave me was too much and I actually forgot about these guys. Thuzad lost his composure due to a rare anger. He had to do something now or he would be crushed and destroyed by Duke Marcus. I admit that I am not as good as you in a direct battle, but can you protect every single one of your women? Ah. The Great Lich grinned. Half of his body was stuck in the mud, but he still used his left hand that could move to make a casting gesture. Come. Have a taste of my undead fantasy. Suddenly, a terrifying will covered the entire space. An unknown shockwave blasted towards the alliance of heroes. Almost everyone was sent flying into the sky. Aurelia somersaulted 3 times in the air before she stabilized herself. A shadow arrow brushed past the bottom of her boots and hit a nearby pillar. The destructive black air currents easily melted the pillar that was so thick that it would take 2 people to wrap their arms around it. Chapter 1280. The strange shockwave blew most of the heroes away and some of them even tumbled a few times. Kalia covered her sore nose, tears streaming down her face. She looked rather pitiful. She saw Wuxia crawl out of the ice barrier, her hands covering her red forehead. It was obvious that she had no choice but to use the godly skill, ice barrier, at the last moment. Everyone realized that the scene had abruptly changed from the vast ice dragon's lair to a mysterious palace filled with the aura of death. In the distance, the wails of the undead were heart-wrenching. The white fog that could not be seen clearly bound the evil spirits, skeletons and zombies, forming a huge wall of the dead. On top of the wall there were thousands of corpses. Their lower bodies were fused into the wall. Some of them were frantically trying to pull their bodies out, while others were resentfully reaching out their horrifying arms towards the experts of the Alliance. Kalia's eyes widened. Suddenly she saw a burly male undead wearing the armor of a Stormwind City knight charging out of the fog, raising his 2-handed greatsword high and slashing at her. Ah! Even though Kalia had experienced many battles, she only had time to add on one of her holy word, shield, skills. The commandment priest being closed in by a warrior was a rather helpless and despairing thing. Apart from taking it head-on, there was no good way to pull away again. No, before pulling away she first had to take on this undead giant's slash. Commandment magic that could be easily blocked by 10 knights at the same time was easily broken. Kalia's heart was seized by terror in an instant. She could only subconsciously raise the staff in her hand, trying in vain to use her weak arms to withstand this terrifying blow. Be careful. At the critical moment, Gavin Rad arrived like the wind. The long and broad-winged sword dangerously blocked the giant's blade at the last moment. There was no clanging sound of metal colliding. The strong wind and thunder on the wind sword directly bounced off the giant's heavy sword. Vesuvius. Gavin Rad frowned. Long before the attack on Naxxramas, every Alliance hero had received intelligence from Duque, pointing out the powerhouses who had been killed and then joined the Scourge army while Naxxramas was wreaking havoc all over the continent. However, he didn't expect that the guy who should have been destroyed in the fortress's bombardment would actually reappear in this strange space. On the other side, Jaina had exchanged more than 10 blows with a shadow sorcerer who had long white hair and thick dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a big-shot cultivator who hadn't slept for God knew how many nights. The image of this guy in front of him suddenly overlapped with the other catastrophe leader in the intelligence report. Plague messenger noise? Jaina cried out involuntarily. Theon slashed Ashbringer at a huge beetle-like monster, but unfortunately, the holy light he swung out was swallowed by the monster. That was a heavy blow that could easily turn a large group of undead into ashes. However, the other party did not dodge or evade. He took it head-on with his powerful body. Theon's expression darkened. A nub recon? If those people who should have been killed according to the intelligence report appeared here and shocked the Alliance experts, then the Alliance experts would be shocked. As for the last person, he shocked them to the extreme. Every Alliance expert's eyes widened as they saw a pair of huge dragon wings whizzing out of the white fog in front of them. After dispersing the cold white mist, a terrifying face was revealed. Under the 2 pairs of huge blue horns was a pair of long and narrow eyes that looked like golden pearls. They shone with an ominous glint. The thick sky-blue scales were covered with horny bone plates that looked like a swarm of bees. Each of the limbs was as thick and powerful as the pillars of a great hall. The claws were so sharp that they could easily tear apart a city wall, and the huge bloody mouth was filled with the aura of frost. Even if they did not recognize the giant beast's appearance, Based on the same perception, every single one of the Alliance's powerhouses whispered the same name, Saffron. This was impossible. Yes. Everyone knew it was impossible. 6 years ago Archimonde died. When Arthas responded to the call of the Lich King Nizul and rushed to Northrend to save him, he met the Blue Dragon Saffron. At that time, Saffron was a capable general under the Blue Dragon King Maligos, and was quite a powerful blue dragon in the Blue Dragon race. But when he met the two heroes, Arthas and Anub Recon, he couldn't stand up to them. After Saffron was defeated and killed, Arthas used the power of corruption to revive Saffron as a frost dragon. The insufferably arrogant frost dragon Saffron became the claws of the Scourge army. Just a moment ago, everyone had seen Saffron's skeletal form. How could they see a Saffron that seemed to be alive again? Magni, who was in his god's descent state, smashed a fat abomination leader away with his hammer. He immediately yelled, "Jaina, something's wrong. Are these guys illusions? If we get killed, will we really die?" Duque wasn't here, so Jaina, who was also a Breaking Dawn wizard, had the highest authority here. As Jaina attacked Noise with frost magic, her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. Her senses were fully activated, and she kept comparing the situation around her with all the information she knew. Suddenly, she remembered a story that Duque had told her many years ago about a warm man in a red shirt. It had nothing to do with illusions. It was a magic spell that used the caster's mental landscape to rewrite reality. The name of this forbidden spell was Inherent Barrier. Once this forbidden spell was activated, it would cause the surrounding space to change into a completely different scenery. The materialization of the mental landscape meant that the inherent barrier would replace oneself and the world without changing one's realm. At this time, the size of oneself in the world would be swapped, and the world would be completely locked in a small container. In Duke's example, the strange heroic spirit named Wei Gong is the wolf, had its inherent enchantment materialized into a red wilderness with countless ownerless sword tombstones. What appeared on the horizon was leaping flames, and in the distance were several huge gears. Jaina couldn't be sure, but Duque's example was the closest one she could think of. She immediately shouted, "Don't die. If we die in this world, we will also become corpses outside." I don't know if this is the inherent barrier that Duque mentioned, but I only know that to maintain such a terrifying illusory space requires an astronomical amount of mana, even for a demigod wizard. At this moment in the outside world, Duque stared at Kel Thuzad with a cold expression. How extravagant! To maintain this illusory world, the amount of mana you use every second is equivalent to the total mana of a Breaking Dawn wizard, right? Chapter 1281. It was impossible for Kel Thuzad to know that Duque had the system elf, the ultimate weapon among the ultimate weapons. He was only secretly shocked by Duque's terrifying observation skills. In this regard, he deepened his own judgment of the situation. Opposite him, Duque held on to Onyxia's reins and let her hang in the air. All of a sudden, his comrades and lover disappeared. This was no doubt a blow to Duque, but it was also a turning point. That was because the system elf's data stream was pouring down on his retina, which he hadn't seen in a long time. A huge amount of data poured into Duque's spiritual sea. After transmigrating for so long from the initial discomfort, it had now become very natural. Duque could already read at least 100 pages of A4 paper in 1 second. In a sense, Duque could be considered a Superman. The unknown always easily brought fear, but when the mysterious veil was lifted in front of him, the excitement and thrill was like the goddess of victory lifting her skirt. That was the smell of the sea, cough cough. The above was purely a slip of the hand and an irresponsible imagination. It had to be said that Kel Thuzad used his own magic and will to cast a forbidden spell-level magic, creating a space within a space, pulling the enemy in and beating him up. This was a move that Duque liked. The corners of Duque's mouth curled up in a strange arc and he asked despite knowing the answer, "I'm just curious, why don't you pull me into that small world?" Kel Thuzad was extremely cunning. "When you become a great lich loyal to my lord, I'll tell you." An incomparably dazzling magic array that emitted a mysterious white radiance suddenly appeared below Duque and Onyxia. 10 times the gravity, coupled with a strong elemental repulsion, made Duque and Onyxia immediately fall into a trap. This is, roar. The sudden control caused the movements of Duque and his servant to pause. They thought that Cal Thuzad would take the opportunity to attack. Who knew that he would actually be scared? No, this should be called a strategic retreat. Cal Thuzad was in a sorry state as he controlled the frost dragon that was the lower half of his body. He could only rely on his 4 skeletal limbs to escape. They left the frost dragon's hall without looking back and fled into the huge corridor, as if they wanted to enter Cal Thuzad's own hall. At the same time, countless undyings swarmed out from all directions. Duque narrowed his eyes and looked at the red human-shaped frames on his retina. His face sank. He finally understood why Cal Thuzad had found so many elite monsters as cannon fodder. This guy was trying to stall for time until the undead fantasy, which was similar to an inherent enchantment, killed Theon and the others, and then turned them into powerful undead. Then they would turn around and deal with Duke. Humph. Duque snorted coldly. Seeing that you can't deal with me, you want to use the deaths of my family, friends, and lovers to provoke me and tempt me into depravity? Cal Thuzad, no wonder you can't be seen in public. You have the nerve to use such a petty trick on me? So what if I'm petty? As long as it works. Hee hee. Cal Thuzad's voice floated in the corridor. Idiot. You've underestimated me, and you've underestimated the strength of my companions and lovers. With Duque's current status, it could be said that he could have as many ordinary women as he wanted. Among the nobles of various countries, there was no lack of beauties who could be regarded as goddesses before Duque crossed over. However, Duque did not touch any of them. Why? He was not a saint. It was precisely because this world was too dangerous that Duque could not guarantee that he could protect his own women. In the beginning, it was a natural development. Later on, Duke had purposely chosen heroic girls who could fight and were able to do well in combat. Just look at Queen Sylvanas. If an ordinary enemy dared to have any ideas about her, they must be tired of living. What they should be worried about was the enemy's life. Since the system had analyzed the characteristics and strength of Cal Thuzad's undead fantasy, then Duque could roughly calculate how much time he had left. Duque did not waste time. He cursed in a low voice, squeezed his legs, and 1 man and 1 dragon directly rushed into the huge corridor. Boom. When the fire elemental magic erupted from Duque's body like a volcanic eruption, anyone would feel an invincible aura. Cal Thuzad felt that he had clearly abandoned the emotion called fear, but the feeling that Duque gave him now, even if it was converted into soul fluctuations, was still fear. Duque, 1 man and 1 dragon. The violent flames with the aura of divinity surged out like a tsunami. Onyxia stomped down with her claws, and in the huge corridor that was at least 100 stories high and as wide as 10 football fields, a series of kacha sounds rang out. Terrifying cracks appeared on the gorgeous yet sturdy floor of the corridor. At this time, the powerful defense system began to operate, but Duque was like a real god. Even though this was once Cal Thuzad's own mage tower and had repeatedly strengthened the defense with magic, it could not stop him and the Black Dragon Princess footsteps. The guardian statues that were built with the Death Knights as the blueprint came to life and raised their swords against Duque and his servants. One by one, the Death Knights rode their undead warhorses and rushed forward at high speed under the cover of the fat abomination. In midair, hundreds and thousands of gargoyles pounced over. Master? Onyxia was inquiring. Duque's lips curled up. Just focus on chasing. Yes. Until today. Now that Duque was infinitely close to the divine realm, how could Duque care about these ordinary elite monsters? His eyes widened and suddenly, countless small black dragon heads made of arcane energy appeared in the air around Onyxia. Every dragon head was vivid and lifelike, exactly the same as the head of the Black Dragon Princess. Even though Onyxia had already sensed it in her heart, she was still slightly startled. The next moment, every arcane dragon head opened its mouth at the same time. That was a dragon's breath. That was a fireball. That was a flame blast. That was a rain of flames. That was a waterfall of fire that fell from the sky. The guardian statues immediately collapsed. Whether it was the abomination or the Death Knights, in front of the raging flames, they instantly turned into dust and disappeared in the wind. The gargoyles that should have caused trouble all collapsed into dust. 1 man and 1 dragon rushed into the corridor, and nothing could stop them for even a minute and a half. With just a flap of Onyxia's wings, Kel Thuzad's defense instantly collapsed. At this moment, Duque seemed to be possessed by the Titan of the Pantheon Temple. He was the invincible god that conquered and transformed all the galaxies back then. No matter what kind of existence it was, it could not stop his footsteps. Impossible. In the distance, the Great Lich's terrified voice came. Chapter 1282. Impossible? Why is it impossible? Duque sneered and said something that Chairman Ku did not understand. Idiot, not everyone can win Tianji's horse race. It had to be said that Kel Thuzad was very creative. He wanted to use a new move to deal with Duque's companions while using cannon fodder to stall for time. But so what? Hundreds and thousands of elites rushed out from the corridor, all using their strongest combat skills and ultimate magic. However, these elite monsters who could slaughter a village or a town on their own in the outside world were like ants in front of Duque and Onyxia. Once the Sea of Fire arrived, everything collapsed. There was no blood, only complete destruction. These hundreds and thousands of powerful undead creatures could not stop Duque at all and were destroyed in the blink of an eye. 3 frost bone dragons pounced over with their fangs and claws bared. They seemed to still have the great ferocity they had when they were alive, and even the earth trembled. Without a doubt, these 3 bone dragons had been blessed by Syndagosa's special secret technique. Bang! At this moment, Onyxia's left claw stepped out and instantly made a magnificent 360-degree turn that did not match her huge body. Normally, dragons would rarely make such a fancy attack. As Duque's mount, as a demigod dragon connected to Duque's soul, Onyxia could clearly see a wave-like arc. The long and sturdy dragon tail was like the largest meteor hammer in the world. With unparalleled power and prestige, it swept over. The black dragon silhouettes seemed to have split the space apart. With a flash of black light, a violent whistling sound was heard, followed by 3 consecutive explosions. The heads of the 3 ice frost bone dragons instantly exploded. This scene was many times more exciting than a bowling ball. So what if he had been blessed by Syndagosa? So what if he had been an ancient dragon? Unless it was Syndagosa himself, any dragon below the Dragon King that had become a bone dragon would not be able to gain the favor of Onyxia and Duque when they were almost one with each other. Roar roar. Even Onyxia was pleasantly surprised by such a hearty attack. She couldn't help but stretch her neck and roar. The raging flames and the holy aura around Duke's body caused the souls of almost every undead creature that he and Oni destroyed to perish. Their combination was like the most ferocious weapon in the world, seemingly capable of slaughtering gods and devils. Kel Thuzad's plan worked, but he also miscalculated. As someone who had been suppressed from the beginning to the end, he clearly understood his position. Perhaps before Naxxramas fell into the temple of Ankh-Raj, he still had a chance to win against Duque. After their own side was forcefully weakened by Duque, whether it was the loss of a leader or the loss of magic reserves, Naxxramas' combat power had fallen to a dangerous level. When Duque stole control of the fortress and trapped him and Saffron, he knew that it was only a matter of time before the leaders of the last 3 zones were destroyed. This was a last-ditch struggle, but it was also a last-ditch effort. Kel Thuzad had no choice but to take the risk and play a game of high-level horses against low-level horses. He tried to use cannon fodder to stall for time and win in the undead fantasy, thus turning the tables. Unfortunately, he ran into Duque. In a few moments, the system genie scanned that the magic supporting the defense system was not Kel Thuzad's magic. If one had to say something, it was that Kel Thuzad used the souls stored in Naxxramas as fuel to supply the undead army to besiege Duque. Duque seemed to be using his own magic to crazily output, but in fact most of the fireballs were hitting the magic nodes of the defense system in the corridor. When Kel Thuzad poured all his magic into the undead fantasy, there was the unstoppable scene of Duque and his dragon. Not long after, Duque had already killed his way to the hall where Kel Thuzad was. On the north side of the hall, the half-crippled Sapphire curled up its body and surrounded Kel Thuzad, making a defensive posture. Kel Thuzad seemed to be unable to suppress his anger. He raised a blood-red scroll high up. Bastard! Bastard! You forced me, Duke Marcus. I've changed my mind. I'll make you pay the most terrible price. Eternally. This was a dragon skin contract filled with darkness and coldness. Even 100 meters away, one could clearly feel the cold aura overflowing from it, and one could faintly hear the cries of thousands of wronged souls. The system genie's analysis made Duque's heart skip a beat. After scanning, the contract has the blood of Great Chieftain Nizul. Great Chieftain Nizul? Wasn't that after the end of World War II at the Dark Portal? Before that big explosion, Nizul was still a dignified great chieftain, a living person with flesh and blood. Duque only knew that according to the original history, Nizul was captured by Kill Jaden and tortured to his heart's content. Not only did he lose his life, but even his soul was compressed and packed into an ice skeleton. He did not expect that there was a soul contract forged with the blood of his true beast. Under the system's scan, Duque could clearly see that this contract, which was written in the Eridar language, only had half of it left. However, this was not a problem for Duque, who was proficient in the Eridar language. In less than 100th of a second, a complete contract appeared on Duque's retina. This was the soul contract that Kill Jaden forced Nizul to sign. It was branded with the great chieftain's true beast oath. Nizul swore eternal loyalty to the Burning Legion, and the words were branded on it. It could be said that this contract was the basis for Kill Jaden to send Nizul, who had become a Lich King, to Azeroth to cause trouble. This contract contained the strongest laws of Eridar and the will of countless Void Lords to help suppress it. There was also Kill Jaden's four-fingered handprint on it. In theory, if Nizul tried to break free from the contract, this demonic handprint would cross space and time to teach Nizul a lesson. There were many harsh terms on the blood contract. Even if the contract had already expired, Duque felt suffocated just by looking at it. He could not help but tremble. Damn, it seemed that a guy called Infernal Affairs had broken free from the soul contract of the Burning Legion. After destroying the largest fortress in the Twisting Nether, the Burning Legion's strictness towards the soul contract had reached a peak. According to this contract, if Nizul disobeyed Kill Jaden's orders, 99% of his soul would receive the most terrible revenge. Fortunately, the remaining 1% would only be used to witness his eternal pain. However, Nizul still chose to rebel. At the cost of his own soul being split, his soul being infinitely diluted, and even losing himself. Chapter 1283. Suddenly, everything could be explained. Even if Nizul was a coward from beginning to end and did not have the courage to cheat his compatriots, nor did he have the courage to fight against the demons but beast, human, infernal, slave. After years of inhumane torture, his body was broken by Kill Jaden, and even his bones were turned to ashes. He never gave up his heart of freedom. On the other hand, the demon commander's contract was not so easily violated. This was why after Archimonde died, Nizul chose to jump ship and set up his own mountain. His magic power suddenly dropped. Even his soul was almost worn out because of the contract's backlash. It would be strange if he was not weak. On the other hand, no one thought that Earthies would be so loyal that she ran to save her master. Not only did she kill a large number of guys who blocked her way, but she also defeated Illidan, who worked for Kill Jaden, in one fell swoop. Finally, she ascended the frozen throne and merged with Nizul's poor remnant soul that had been diluted many times. The perfect fusion of an orc soul and a death knight who was once a human was enough to make one drunk. Duque did not know why Kel Thuzad took out this half of the contract at this time, but it could not be anything good. He did not give Duque time to react. Hula! Kel Thuzad's gold-rimmed purple hat seemed to fall with the wind. The part of the white bone that should have been between his eyebrows actually opened up a small door the size of a pinky. The side of the door flowed with a gray-white light. The hazy feeling was as if he had ground his own bones into ashes and scattered them. No. This was more like he had directly poured out the most profound and mysterious evil curse from his endless spiritual world. When the gray-white light between his eyebrows fell on Nizul's blood contract, a mysterious law that the system elves could not analyze on the spot melted. The blood stains on the dragonskin blood contract felt lighter on the spot. The next moment, the frost in the entire hall suddenly became several times stronger. A soul voice that was compressed to less than 10 seconds rushed into Duque's eardrums. If Duque was an ordinary person, he would have long ago gone deaf from this noise like compressed audio. When Duque naturally unraveled this audio, even though time passed very slowly in the outside world, Duque could clearly hear Kel Thuzad's death declaration. He. It was just a man and a dragon, yet they were not afraid of going against the Calamity Army, no, even the entire world of death. As expected of the Alliance's hero, Duke Marcus. I have already punished you 3 times for your arrogance. That's right, what you're tasting right now is the 3 consecutive traps that I've painstakingly laid out. 3. Duque could not help but frown. He. The most mellow poisonous wine could only be released at the last moment. Only then would it taste the most fragrant. So you shall die here, in the name of the Lich King. Facing the terrifying aura that covered the sky and covered the earth, Duque instinctively felt that something was wrong. He pulled the reins, intending to make Xianxia quickly retreat. At the same time, he instinctively wanted to open up an ice barrier. But it was no longer a matter of time. Because that was already the past. The attack had already ended and the trap had already taken effect. Something on the inside of Duke's chest swelled up at an extremely fast speed. Sturdy. Sharp. Terrifying. Cold. What burst out of his chest and burst out of his bones and flesh was astonishingly ice prism. The equipment that Duque was wearing was at least of the Mount Hydral grade. If it was during the second battle of the Dark Portal, it would be immune to all sorts of physical damage from swords, warhammers, axes that were below demigod grade as well as Breaking Dawn grade magic. Now, even against demigod grade and Breaking Dawn grade magic attacks, it could mostly reduce the damage by more than half. But there was one thing: attacks from the inside were exceptions. Needless to say, this ice prism appeared after it was pierced. At this moment, Duque was like a flying insect soaring in the sky. After wantonly rushing around, he fell into a terrifying spider web chain trap that was woven with 10 or 20 layers. So what if he was strong? No matter how much he struggled, he was just bait for the Black Widow poison spiders. Duque. Xianxia let out a cry of surprise. She felt a palpitating fluctuation in her soul. She could not care about the other undying that were rushing over. She suddenly bent her long dragon neck back and saw Duque's chest exploding. Duque's body was stiff. His neck was like a rusty machine as he moved with difficulty. He touched his chest in disbelief. There, the extremely rare epic robe had been pierced from the inside. At the tip of the ice prism, there was still a beating heart hanging. Frost, divinity. Kel Thuzad finally could not help but laugh wildly. Foolish man. Have you actually forgotten that my essence is different from yours? I don't need to breathe. Seeing the surrounding divinity fragments explode in the void at the same time and turn into strange hedgehog-like ice balls, Duque understood everything. Yes, that's right. It was the attack of the frost divinity. On the scene, it looked like Duque had used the power of the fire divinity to expel the power of Kel Thuzad's frost divinity. But Duque was a living person and a living person needed to breathe. The air that felt a little cold was actually floating with a very small amount of frost divinity. In order to deceive Duque, Kel Thuzad did not even use the shadow divinity that Duque was most concerned about. Instead, he used the frost power that mages also had. A demigod great ice dragon and a great lich with ice and shadow attributes. It was very normal for a small amount of frost divinity to leak out. Then this method of casting a wide net succeeded. Duque was directly hit. No. Feeling the rapidly weakening soul connection, Xianxia was stunned. She no longer cared about fighting and actually shrunk at high speed on the spot. She turned into her human form and hugged the bloody Duque. Bastard. You lied to me. Aren't you unkillable? Didn't you say you were going to change my fate? But seeing Xianxia lose her composure, Kel Thuzad's mood suddenly exploded. His body slowly rose from saffron, and milky white foam appeared where his lower body was connected to the frost dragon. Then he separated from the frost dragon. Die. Duke Marcus. You're finally dead. Feeling the decline of Duque's soul fire, Kel Thuzad was very happy. He was so happy that countless bubbles of pleasure rushed into the depths of his soul, nourishing every corner of his soul. Xianxia, don't struggle. Follow your master and serve the great Lich King. Xianxia raised her head. A tearful smile suddenly appeared on her tear-stained face. Idiot. Kel Thuzad suddenly felt that something was wrong. At this moment, a bright golden light suddenly pierced through his chest, and the spiral-shaped blade radiated light in all directions. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.